Welcome back to Wolf Heart Tales, where passion meets destiny under the moonlight. Before we dive into tonight's tale of forbidden love and deadly secrets, show your pack pride by howling at that like button and subscribing so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Smoke and Secrets. The air in the Shadowfire kitchens tasted of iron and ash, thick enough to choke on. Rhea dragged the back of her hand across her forehead, smearing soot into the copper-red hair that refused to stay braided. 3 deer carcasses rotated on massive iron spits, fat dripping into flames that roared like living things. The heat was unbearable, a suffocating wall that made her lungs burn with every breath. But the heat was better than the memory. 3 years. 3 years since the screams, since the scent of blood soaking into earth, since her mother's healing hands went cold and still, since her father's final battle cry was silenced, since Cade's voice called her name before darkness swallowed everything. Rhea, you're going to burn it. Cora's warning yanked her back to the present. Her best friend stood beside her, flour dusting her raven hair like premature snow, concern etched across her features. Rhea jerked the copper pot off the flame just before the reduction turned to char. Sorry. My mind wandered. Your mind has been wandering for 8 days straight, Cora said quietly, voice pitched low so the head cook wouldn't overhear. The old woman was currently terrorizing 2 younger servants about improperly scrubbed platters. It's the selection, isn't it? The Luna selection. How could it be anything else? For weeks, Stoneheart Fortress had buzzed with preparation. 12 candidates from the most powerful packs in the kingdom would arrive today, each one groomed and trained from birth for this moment. Each one hoping to catch the eye of Alpha King Kale Stoneheart and claim the title of Luna Queen. Each one, everything Rhea could never be. I'm fine, Rhea lied, returning her attention to the sauce. But Cora knew her too well. You've been checking every ingredient twice, sometimes 3 times. Sniffing things like you expect them to bite you. Cora's eyes narrowed. What aren't you telling me? Rhea's jaw tightened. She couldn't explain the truth, couldn't tell Cora about the gift her mother had passed down through blood and tears. The ability to detect poison, to sense death hiding in what others deemed safe. It was a gift that had saved Rhea's life the night the rogues came. She'd smelled them minutes before the attack, given her family precious seconds of warning. Not that it had been enough. The king is particular about his food, Rhea said instead, which wasn't entirely a lie. I'm just being careful. Before Cora could press further, the oak door burst open with enough force to rattle the iron pots hanging from ceiling hooks. The head cook's bark silenced every conversation in the kitchen. They're here. Candidates arriving at the main gate. The feast must be flawless. Every dish perfect. Every servant invisible. Anyone who shames this fortress will spend a week in the stocks. Move. The kitchen exploded into controlled chaos. Rhea fell into the rhythm she knew by heart, her hands steady despite the anxiety coiling in her gut. She portioned venison onto silver platters with precision, arranged root vegetables like artwork, drizzled sauce with the care of a painter adding final brushstrokes. But beneath the calm exterior, her wolf stirred restlessly. Something felt wrong. She couldn't name it, couldn't pin it down, but the sensation crawled beneath her skin like ants under flesh. Above them, in the great hall, Alpha King Kale Stoneheart stood before floor-length windows overlooking his kingdom. Late afternoon sun caught the silver threading through his black hair. Too much silver for someone only 34 winters old. His amber eyes, the color of molten gold, surveyed the approaching carriages with an expression carved from stone. 10 years. 10 years he'd ruled alone, refusing to take a mate despite tradition screaming at him to produce an heir. 10 years since he'd found his father convulsing on the throne room floor, foam bubbling at his lips, poison burning through his veins while the guilty vanished into shadow. Trust no one. That was the lesson death had taught him. Your Majesty. Commander Thane approached, boots echoing against stone like a death knell. The candidates have begun arriving. Lord Malachi Ravenwood's party is first through the gate. Something cold settled in Kale's chest. Malachi Ravenwood, one of the most powerful alphas in the realm, and one of the most dangerous. The man smiled too much, schemed too often, and had fingers in too many treasonous pots. And his daughter? Kale asked, voice carefully neutral. Lady Isolde is with him. The council considers her the favored candidate. Of course she is. Beautiful, well-bred, politically connected. Everything a Luna should be on parchment. Kale turned from the window, catching his reflection in the glass, the scars on his knuckles, the hardness in his eyes, the weight of a crown that felt heavier with each passing year. Assemble the candidates in the Great Hall, Kale ordered. Let's begin this charade. Below, in the suffocating heat of the kitchens, Rhea lifted a silver platter of roasted pheasant and froze. The scent hit her like a fist to the gut. Subtle, almost imperceptible beneath layers of herbs and spices, but unmistakable to her trained nose. Her mother's voice echoed in memory, teaching her the signatures of death, the way certain compounds left traces that others couldn't detect. Wolfsbane, just the faintest hint, carefully disguised, woven into the glaze coating the meat. But there, definitely there. Her heart hammered against her ribs, so hard, she thought they might crack. Someone had poisoned this dish. Someone in this kitchen, or someone with access to the stores. And unless she was very much mistaken, this platter was meant for the high table. For the king. Rhea? Cora appeared beside her, frowning. You look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong? Rhea's mind raced. If she spoke now, if she caused a scene, who would believe her? She was nobody, an Omega servant with no proof beyond her word. They'd dismiss her, maybe punish her for disrupting the feast. And whoever had done this would simply try again. But if she said nothing and the king died... Cora, Rhea whispered, gripping her friend's wrist hard enough to bruise. Listen carefully. When we serve tonight, I need you to watch who handles the king's food. Every person. Remember their faces.
Why?
What's?
Please.
Just trust me. Cora searched her eyes, then nodded slowly. Whatever she saw there convinced her not to argue. The great hall blazed with candlelight and ambition. 12 young women sat in places of honor, arranged in a semicircle before the raised dais where the king would sit. Lady Isolde Ravenwood occupied the center position, her ice-blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders, her gown the color of winter frost. She smiled serenely, the picture of confidence. Kale entered through the private corridor, and every head turned. The weight of their stares pressed against him like physical force. He took his seat, Commander Thane at his right hand, and surveyed the assembled candidates with the enthusiasm of a man facing execution. They preened under his gaze, each trying to catch his attention. He felt nothing. No spark. No recognition. Just the hollow ache that had become his constant companion. Let the feast begin, he announced, his voice carrying easily through the vaulted space. Servants emerged from the kitchen entrances like shadows, bearing platters that made the nobles murmur with appreciation. Rhea moved among them, invisible in her plain dress, her heart hammering so violently she thought everyone must hear it. She watched as dishes were set before the candidates, watched as wine was poured into crystal goblets. And then she saw it, the silver platter being carried toward the king's table. Roasted pheasant glazed and garnished, presented by a senior servant she recognized from the kitchens. Kale reached for the serving fork. Everything in Rhea screamed. She didn't think so. I couldn't think. Her body moved before her mind caught up, shoving past other servants, stumbling over the hem of her dress in her haste. Voices rose in confusion as she broke through the line of servers like a woman possessed. Don't eat that. The words ripped from her throat, raw and desperate. She lunged forward just as Kale lifted a piece of meat toward his mouth. Her hands connected with the platter, sending it crashing to the floor. Food scattered across stone. Silver rang like a funeral bell. And in the sudden, absolute silence that followed, Rhea found herself on her knees amid the wreckage, breathing hard, staring up at the Alpha King. His amber eyes met hers. The world stopped. The mate bond hit them both like lightning striking stone, a golden thread snapping into place between their souls, binding them together with a force that stole breath from lungs. Rhea gasped, her wolf surging forward with feral recognition. Mine, it howled.
Ours. Mate.
Kale's pupils dilated, his wolf rising to the surface with a possessive snarl that made his hands shake. The scent of her filled his lungs, wild honey and herbs, and something uniquely her that made every instinct scream to reach for her, claim her, mark her before anyone else could touch what was his. But she was Omega, a servant. She'd just destroyed the Luna selection ceremony and assaulted his person. And she looked at him with such pure terror that it carved something hollow in his chest. Seize her. Commander Thane's order shattered the moment. 2 guards rushed forward, their grips bruising as they hauled Rhea to her feet. The hall erupted. Voices overlapped, some demanding explanation, others crying for immediate execution. Through it all, Kale said nothing. He simply stared at the girl who'd just changed everything, the mate bond screaming between them like a living thing. In the shadows near the spice alcove, a boy in Ravenwood livery watched with eyes blown wide with terror. When Rhea's gaze flickered toward him, he flinched as if struck and vanished into the steam. Chapter 2. When Amber Eyes Meet Fate. The silence stretched like a blade held to the throat. Rhea knelt amid scattered food and shattered silver, her chest heaving, copper hair falling loose from its braid in wild tangles. Every eye in the great hall fixed upon her with the weight of judgment. The pressure of their stares made it hard to breathe, made her wolf whimper and cower inside her chest. Above her, Alpha King Kale Stoneheart rose slowly from his chair. His amber eyes blazed with something Rhea couldn't name, something that made her insides twist with equal parts terror and longing. Power radiated from him in waves, the unmistakable aura of an alpha in his prime, ancient and absolute. And she was nothing. Nobody. An Omega servant who had just committed an act punishable by death. Your Majesty. Commander Thane's hand moved to his sword hilt, the rasp of steel against leather cutting through the chaos. She must be restrained. This is an act of treason. Treason. Lord Malachi Ravenwood's voice boomed across the hall. He rose from his seat, his silver-streaked beard quivering with righteous indignation. An attack on the king's person cannot be tolerated. She must be made an example of, lest others think they can act with such disrespect. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled nobles, like wind through wheat. Lady Isolde stood as well, her ice blue gown catching candlelight, her expression perfectly crafted concern. This creature has disrupted the sacred selection, Isolde said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. Surely she must face the executioner's blade for such an offense. The guards tightened their grip on Rhea's arms, bruises already forming beneath their fingers. But worse than the physical pain was the agony building in her chest, a hollow, gnawing ache that had appeared the moment their eyes met. The mate bond. She recognized it from her mother's teachings, from the stories whispered among unmated wolves. This man, this Alpha King who could order her execution with a single word, was her destined mate. And he would never accept her. Could never accept her. The impossibility of it crushed her as surely as any executioner's blade. Answer your king. Thane's voice held the edge of command, sharp enough to draw blood. Why did you interrupt the feast? Rhea's throat worked. She met Kale's gaze, saw the recognition there, saw him feel what she felt. And she saw him deny it, saw him lock the bond away behind walls built from betrayal and loss. The food was poisoned, Rhea whispered. Her voice barely carried, but in the tense silence, everyone heard. I could smell it. Wolfsbane in the glaze. The hall erupted again, louder this time. Isolde's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with theatrical shock. Malachi's face darkened with rage. Other candidates gasped and drew back from their own plates as if poison might leap from the porcelain. Lies. One of the Alpha Lords shouted from the back. She seeks to cause chaos, to disrupt the selection for her own twisted purposes. What purposes could a kitchen servant possibly have? Kale's question silenced the room like a blade through silk. He descended from the dais, each step measured and deliberate. His wolf pushed against his skin, demanding he go to her, claim her, protect her from every threat. He resisted with every ounce of control he possessed. But Moon Goddess, it was hard. He stopped 3 paces away, close enough that her scent filled his lungs, close enough that the mate bond pulled taut between them like a rope stretched to breaking. How would poisoning me benefit someone at your station? Rhea met his gaze, and the bond flared between them, golden and terrible and undeniable. She saw the recognition in those amber depths, the knowledge that he felt what she felt. And she saw him deny it with every fiber of his being. It wouldn't benefit me at all, Your Majesty. She found strength somewhere deep, beneath the fear and pain. If she was going to die, she'd die with her head high. I don't want anything from you. I only wanted to keep you from harm. Pretty words. Malachi stepped forward, his expression grave and concerned. But words prove nothing. This girl has made a serious accusation. If she's wrong, she's slandered the candidates and deserves severe punishment. If she's right, he spread his hands. Then someone in this hall is a traitor. There's a simple way to determine the truth. Thane moved to the fallen platter, studying the scattered food with a soldier's tactical eye. A taster, Your Majesty. Bring a condemned prisoner from the dungeons.
No.
Kale's refusal was instant and absolute. He wouldn't risk another life, not even a condemned man's, on what might be paranoid delusion. But then he looked at the girl again. I saw the certainty in her emerald eyes, the way her hands trembled even as her chin stayed raised. Saw the truth written in every line of her body. His mate wouldn't lie to him. His wolf was absolutely certain of that. Except you can't afford to trust that instinct, the rational part of his mind whispered. Not when your father died from trusting the wrong person. Bring a prisoner, Kale ordered finally, his voice rough. One already condemned to death. If the food is clean, then this girl faces execution for disrupting the selection and slandering our noble guests. His jaw clenched. If it's poisoned, then we have a traitor to find. The weight stretched endlessly. Rhea swayed on her feet, exhaustion and terror warring inside her chest. Across the hall, Cora stood frozen among the other servants, her face pale as death. Their eyes met briefly, and Rhea tried to convey reassurance she didn't feel. The guards returned with a man in chains, filthy, hollow-eyed, with the look of someone who'd already made peace with death. The prisoners stared at the scattered food with confusion, then something like desperate hope. You want me to eat this? His voice cracked. Why? You'll receive a pardon if you survive, Kale said. The lie tasted like ash on his tongue. The man was condemned for the murder of 3 innocent travelers. No amount of testing food would erase that crime. But Kale needed cooperation, and hope was a powerful motivator. The prisoner didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees and began shoveling food into his mouth. The meat Kale had almost consumed, the glaze Rhea had detected. For a moment, nothing happened. Isolde exhaled with relief, her hand on her father's arm. Malachi's expression began to shift toward righteous vindication. Then the prisoner convulsed. His body arched backward, spine bending at an unnatural angle that made bones creak audibly. Foam bubbled at his lips, pink tinged with blood. The sounds he made were inhuman, gasps and gurgles as his throat swelled shut, cutting off air. Shifter metabolism was supposed to burn through toxins faster than humans, process poisons with supernatural efficiency. But wolfsbane was one of the few substances that could kill their kind.
And it was killing him now.
The prisoner died within 3 minutes. His final breath rattled out across the stone, and his body went still, eyes staring at nothing. The hall remained frozen in horror. Then pandemonium broke loose. Poison. There's poison in the king's food. Who prepared that dish? Which servant touched it? We could have all been killed. Kale barely heard them. His attention locked on Rhea as the guards released her in their shock, their hands going to weapons as if assassins might materialize from shadows. She stumbled, nearly falling, and his body moved without conscious thought. He caught her before she hit the floor, his hands on her arms exactly where the guards had gripped. The contact sent electricity through them both, the mate bond roaring recognition, demanding acknowledgement. "You saved my life," he said quietly, voice pitched for her ears alone. "I couldn't let you die." Her voice broke on the words. "Even if you're—" "What?" His hands tightened infinitesimally, careful of her smaller frame. "Even if I'm what?" But she couldn't say it. Couldn't voice the truth that burned between them like wildfire. Because he was king, and she was nothing, and the mate bond was a cruel joke played by fate. "Your Majesty." Thane approached, his expression grim as death. "We need to determine who prepared this dish. The kitchens must be searched, every servant questioned." "Do it." Kale released Rhea, and the loss of contact felt like tearing away skin. The mate bond screamed in protest, his wolf snarling at the separation. "And this girl remains in custody. She's the only witness we have, the only one who could identify the poison." "Custody." Malachi stepped forward, his tone carefully measured. "Your Majesty, with the greatest respect, perhaps she should be rewarded. She saved your life, after all. Or she's part of a larger conspiracy." Isolde's voice carried clearly, pitched to reach every ear in the hall. How convenient that she detected poison no one else could smell. Perhaps she knew it was there, because she helped place it. Perhaps this entire display is an elaborate ruse to gain your trust. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd like poison through veins. Kale saw the logic in the argument, saw how easily suspicion could twist truth into lies. But his wolf rejected the possibility with absolute certainty. This girl, our mate, would never harm us. Except he couldn't afford to trust that instinct. Not when his father had died from trusting the wrong person. "She'll be held in protective custody," Kale announced, his voice carrying the weight of royal decree. "Both for her safety and for questioning. The Luna selection is suspended until this matter is resolved. All candidates will remain at the fortress as guests, and no one, leaves until we find the traitor responsible." Rhea's legs nearly gave out. Not execution. Not yet. But imprisonment, isolation, and worst of all, the mate bond pulling at her every moment she spent near this man who could never choose her. As guards led her away, gentler this time, but no less firm, Freya looked back once. Kale stood amid the chaos, his amber eyes tracking her movement, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his beard. Their gazes locked across the distance, and the bond sang between them, a connection neither wanted but neither could deny. Everything had changed, and nothing would ever be the same. In the shadows of the great hall, partially concealed behind a pillar carved with ancient pack symbols, Lord Malachi Ravenwood's expression had gone carefully blank. Beside him, Lady Isolde's hands clenched into fists, her perfectly manicured nails digging crescents into her palms. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she hissed under her breath, voice barely audible. "Quiet." Malachi's warning was soft but absolute. "We adapt. We've come too far to fail now." High above, in a tower window overlooking the great hall, a young servant boy named Finn pressed himself against the cold stone, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He'd seen everything, knew everything, and he was absolutely terrified. Chapter 3. Bleeding Truths. The chamber they brought Rhea to wasn't a dungeon cell, but it wasn't far from one either. A narrow room in the fortress's eastern wing, furnished with a simple cot, a wooden chair worn smooth by time, and a basin for washing. A single window, barely wider than her shoulders, looked out over the kitchen gardens where she'd worked in anonymity for 3 years. The door closed behind her with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. She heard the guard take position outside, heard the scrape of his boots against stone as he settled in for a long watch. Rhea sank onto the cot, her legs finally giving out. The adrenaline that had carried her through the feast, through the confrontation, through watching a man die from the poison she detected, drained away all at once. She pressed her hands to her face and simply breathed, trying to process everything that had shattered in the span of an hour. The mate bond thrummed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat, an ache that had nothing to do with physical injury and everything to do with the Alpha King currently somewhere in this fortress. She could feel him, a distant pull like a compass needle seeking north. The sensation terrified her almost as much as it tempted her. Her mother had explained mate bonds during long evenings in their cottage, back when Rhea had been young enough to believe in happy endings. When you meet your true mate, her mother had said, hands gentle as they sorted medicinal herbs, it will be undeniable. Your wolf will recognize theirs, and nothing in this world will feel more right or more terrifying. Rhea hadn't understood the terrifying part then. She understood now. A knock at the door made her jump to her feet, smoothing her stained dress with trembling hands. The guard opened it to admit Commander Thane. The beta moved with military precision, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the sparse room. The king will speak with you now, Thane said without preamble. Come. They walked through torchlit corridors, passing servants who pressed themselves against walls to make room, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Rhea kept her chin raised despite the humiliation of being escorted like a criminal. She'd saved the king's life. Whatever came next, she had that truth to hold on to. The study they entered was warmer than her chamber, a fire crackling in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with books and maps. The scent of leather and parchment filled the air, mixing with something else. Something wild and masculine that made her wolf stir with longing. Him. Kale stood before the hearth, firelight casting his profile in sharp relief, the strong line of his jaw, the silver threading through his black hair, the breadth of his shoulders. He didn't turn as she entered, but his shoulders tensed minutely. He felt it too, then. The bond pulling taut between them like a rope stretched to breaking. Sit, Kale said, his voice carefully controlled. He gestured to a chair across from his desk without looking at her. Thane took position by the door, a silent witness to whatever came next. Rhea sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. Now, in the relative quiet, she could study him properly. The black beard trimmed close to his jaw. The way candlelight caught golden eyes that should have been brown. The scar bisecting his right eyebrow. Evidence of violence survived. He was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, all sharp edges and lethal purpose. And he was hers. No, she corrected herself viciously. He can never be yours. Tell me your name, Kale said, finally turning to face her. The full force of his attention stole her breath, made her wolf whimper with the need to submit, to present, to offer everything she was. Rhea, your majesty. And you've worked in the kitchens for how long? 3 years. Something flickered across his features, too quick to name, but it looked almost like pain. 3 years in my fortress, and I never knew you existed. I'm Omega, your majesty. The words came out sharper than intended, edged with old wounds. We're meant to go unnoticed. Thane shifted warningly, but Kale's expression didn't change. If anything, the tension in his jaw increased, the muscle jumping beneath his beard. Tell me how you detected the poison, he said, moving to lean against his desk. Close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes, the faint lines at their corners. The truth, Rhea. All of it.
So she did.
She explained about her mother, a healer in their small pack who had possessed exceptional abilities with scent. How that gift had passed to Rhea, enhanced beyond even her mother's range. How she could identify herbs and toxins, dangerous compounds hidden beneath layers of other scents. How she'd kept it secret because such abilities made one valuable, and valuable things were often taken by force. My mother said it was a blood gift, Rhea continued, her voice soft with memory. Passed down through generations of healers in our line. She taught me everything she knew before. Her throat closed. Before she died. Demonstrate, Kale ordered. He moved to a cabinet, retrieving several small vials with practiced ease. Eyes closed. Rhea obeyed. She heard him unstop the first vial and heard the faint whisper of liquid against glass. The scent hit her immediately, distinct and unmistakable. Lavender oil. Distilled, not fresh. mixed with a carrier oil, almond, based on the undertone. The next vial, dried willow bark, old, maybe 2 seasons, starting to lose potency. Another, Rhea's nose wrinkled in distaste. Nightshade berries, deadly if ingested. You shouldn't keep that near food preparation areas, Your Majesty. I don't, Kale said quietly. This came from the healer's locked stores. Continue. He tested her with 8 more substances. She identified each one correctly, down to the subtle differences between similar compounds, the variance between white and black hellebore, the distinction between foxglove and comfrey root despite their similar leaf patterns. When she opened her eyes, Kale was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. His amber eyes had darkened to bronze, his wolf riding close to the surface. Remarkable, Thane murmured from his position by the door. Or convenient, Kale countered, though his voice lacked conviction. How do I know you didn't plant the poison yourself? That this entire display isn't an elaborate scheme? The accusation stung like a slap. Rhea met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away even as the mate bond twisted in her chest. Why would I? What could I possibly gain from killing you? Power. Position. Revenge for some perceived slight. He crossed his arms, the gesture defensive. Or perhaps you work for someone else. Someone who wants me dead and saw an opportunity to place an agent in my household. If I wanted you dead, Your Majesty, I wouldn't have stopped you from eating the poison meat. Unless you want to be seen as a hero, to earn my trust before betraying it later. Rhea's hands clenched in her lap, nails biting into her palms. The bond burned beneath her skin, her wolf howling in anguish at the distrust in her mate's voice. But she couldn't tell him that. Couldn't voice the connection thrumming between them when he clearly had no intention of acknowledging it. I have no ambitions beyond survival, she said quietly, forcing her voice to remain steady. I lost everything 3 years ago. My pack was destroyed. My family was killed. I came here seeking shelter, nothing more. Kale's expression shifted, something softer bleeding through the suspicion, a crack in his armor. What happened to your pack? And there it was. The wound she never spoke of, the grief she'd buried beneath duty and exhaustion. But something about the way he asked, genuine curiosity beneath the interrogation, loosened her tongue. Rogues, she said, repeating the lie her pack's destruction had been classified as. The official report that had let the true murderers walk free. They attacked in the night. We were a small pack, isolated in the northern forests. Easy prey. Her voice remained steady through sheer force of will. My mother tried to heal the wounded. My father fought to give us time to flee. My brother Cade, he was only 15, wanted so badly to be a warrior. He tried to protect us. And you survived. Not an accusation. A statement heavy with understanding, with recognition of survivors' guilt. I survived. The words tasted like ash and blood. My mother's gift saved me. I smelled them before they reached our home, and warned my family. It bought us seconds. Not enough to save them. Just enough for me to run like a coward while they died. You're not a coward. Kale's voice had gentled, the harshness bleeding away. You did what your family wanted, you lived. There's no shame in survival. Rhea's throat tightened dangerously. 3 years, and no one had said those words to her. No one had absolved her of the guilt that ate at her like poison. Silence settled between them, broken only by the fire's crackle. Kale's jaw worked, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with old pain. I'm sorry for your loss. Such simple words. But they shattered something inside her chest, made her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. Your Majesty, Thane interjected carefully, sensing the shift in atmosphere. What would you have me do with her? Kale turned to the window, his back to them both. Firelight silhouetted his frame, and Rhea saw the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man braced for inevitable betrayal. She stays in the fortress, he said finally, voice measured. Under protection, not imprisonment. Post guards at her door, but treat her with respect. She may have saved my life tonight. May have. Rhea couldn't stop the question. He looked back at her, and the bond sang between them, golden and terrible and impossible to ignore. I learned long ago not to trust easily, Rhea. My father made that mistake. His hands curled into fists. It killed him. Understanding dawned like cold water. Someone poisoned him too. 10 years ago. I found him convulsing on the throne room floor, foam at his lips, his body burning with toxins I couldn't name. Kale's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who'd told this story too many times. I held him as he died, unable to do anything but watch. They never found who did it. Never found proof. Just theories and suspicions that led nowhere. So you trust no one, Rhea said softly. Can you blame me? She couldn't. And yet the parallel between them struck hard, both orphaned by violence, both carrying wounds that never fully healed, both alone despite being surrounded by people. No, she admitted. I can't. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that went deeper than words, deeper even than the mate bond. Two damaged souls seeing their reflection in each other's eyes. Kale took a step toward her before catching himself, his expression shuddering closed. The bond pulled taut, demanding acknowledgement, demanding connection. Rhea felt it in her bones, the rightness of being near him warring with the impossibility of anything more. Return her to her quarters, Kale ordered Thane, his voice rough as gravel. Tomorrow we begin investigating who prepared the poison dish. For tonight. He turned back to the fire, one hand pressed against the mantel as if holding himself upright.
Get some rest.
As Thane escorted her from the study, Rhea glanced back once. Kale stood before the flames, his head bowed, shoulders tense with strain. The image seared itself into her memory, this powerful alpha brought low by forces he couldn't control. Just like her. The door closed between them, and the mate bond stretched thin, aching with separation. In her chest, Rhea's wolf whimpered. And in the study, Kale's wolf answered with a howl that no one else could hear. Chapter 4. Gardens of Death and Desire. Days blurred together in a haze of investigation and frustration. Commander Thane questioned every kitchen servant, every guard who'd been on duty the night of the feast. The 3 kitchen hands who had handled the king's platter had vanished without a trace, as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. Rhea remained in her chamber, though the guards no longer locked the door. She was free to move about certain areas of the fortress, always escorted, always watched. The isolation gnawed at her, but worse was the constant pull of the mate bond. She could feel Kale even when he was floors away, a magnetic tug that made her wolf whine and pace restlessly. She hadn't seen him since that night in his study. 4 days of careful avoidance, of feeling him through walls and stone, of the bond stretching thinner with each passing hour until it felt like her chest might crack open from the strain. On the 5th morning, Cora finally managed to visit. The guard allowed her entry with a warning look, and the moment the door closed, Cora threw her arms around Rhea with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. I thought they were going to execute you, Cora whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. When you ran forward like that, when the king's guards seized you, I thought I'd lost you. I'm fine, Rhea assured her, though the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Nothing about this situation was fine. Have you heard anything? Any news about the investigation? Cora pulled back, glancing at the door before lowering her voice to barely a whisper. The servants are talking. 3 of our own missing, presumed dead. There are whispers that Ravenwood Pack is involved, but no one will say it openly. Too dangerous. Ravenwood. Rhea's stomach clenched. Lady Isolde's family. Keep this between us, Cora said urgently, her dark eyes wide with fear. I was serving in the Eastern Wing yesterday, near where the noble families are housed. I heard 2 of Ravenwood's servants talking in a corridor they thought was empty. They said something about eliminating witnesses, about making sure loose ends were tied up. She gripped Rhea's hands. I think they killed those kitchen servants. I think they're covering their tracks. The implications crashed over Rhea like icy water. If Ravenwood was behind the poisoning, if they'd murdered witnesses to protect their conspiracy, then Lady Isolde herself might be involved.
But why?
What did she gain from the king's death beyond chaos? Unless chaos was the point. There's more, Cora continued, her voice dropping even lower. One of their younger servants, a boy named Finn, looked terrified during that conversation. After the others left, he stayed behind, and I saw him crying. I approached him carefully, and Rhea, he's desperate to leave Ravenwood service. Says he's seen things, heard things that keep him awake at night. He wants out, but he's too afraid to run. Could he provide evidence? Rhea's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe. If someone could promise him protection. Cora squeezed her hands. I think you should tell Commander Thane. This boy might be willing to provide information if it means freedom from whatever hell he's living in. Before Rhea could respond, a knock at the door made them both jump. The guard opened it to admit Thane himself, his expression unreadable as always. Lady Rhea, he said, the title still strange though Cale had insisted she be addressed with respect. The king requests your presence in the fortress gardens. There's a matter he wishes to discuss regarding the poisonous plants used in the attack. Rhea's heart hammered against her ribs. The gardens. Alone with Cale. The bond thrummed in anticipation even as her mind screamed warnings about the danger of proximity. Cora squeezed her hand once more before departing, leaving Rhea to follow Thane through winding corridors. They emerged into afternoon sunlight, and Rhea breathed deeply for the first time in days, savoring fresh air after her confinement. The medicinal gardens sprawled before them, carefully tended beds of herbs and flowers used for healing and, in some cases, harm. Purple monkshood grew alongside silver comfrey. Deadly nightshades lurked between innocent chamomiles. Life and death are cultivated side by side. Cale stood near a section of tall purple flowers, his back to her. He wore simpler clothes today, a dark tunic and breeches more suited to work than court. His black hair was tied back, revealing the strong line of his neck, the breadth of his shoulders. As Rhea approached, he turned, and the force of his amber gaze stole her breath. For a moment, neither spoke. The mate bond pulled taut between them, singing with the rightness of proximity after days of separation. Rhea's wolf surged forward, desperate to close the distance, to touch, to claim what was theirs. Thank you, Thane, Cale said finally, his voice rougher than usual. That will be all. The commander hesitated, clearly uncomfortable leaving them alone, but ultimately bowed and withdrew. The moment he was out of sight, the air between Rhea and Cale crackled with tension so thick it felt like breathing through water. You wanted to discuss the plants? Rhea managed, forcing her voice to remain steady even as her pulse raced. I wanted you out of that room, Cale admitted, taking a step closer. Close enough now that she could see the exhaustion shadowing his eyes, the way his jaw clenched as if he was fighting some internal battle. The garden seemed a suitable excuse. He gestured to the beds surrounding them. Though I am curious. Can you identify which of these are dangerous? It was safer than acknowledging the bond humming between them like a living thing. Rhea moved through the garden, pointing out the deadly nightshade tucked between medicinal chamomile, the foxglove that could stop a heart, the monkshood that had nearly killed him. Her fingers brushed over the leaves of a healing herb, and memory struck sharp and unexpected. My mother used to gather these, she said softly, voice catching. Comfrey root. She'd make poultices for broken bones, salves for wounds that wouldn't close. Her hands always smelled of it. Earth and healing and hope. Cale moved closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth despite the afternoon sun. You miss her. Every day. The admission hurt, as if speaking it aloud made the loss more real. She was gentle but fierce. She saved more lives than anyone knew. My father said she had healing hands, that the moon goddess herself had blessed her touch. Rhea's voice cracked. She couldn't save herself, though. Couldn't save any of them when the rogues came. My father was a warrior, Cale said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. He believed strength was everything. That if you were powerful enough, cunning enough, you could protect those you loved from any threat. His jaw clenched, muscle jumping. He was wrong. I held him as poison burned through his veins, and all my strength meant nothing. Rhea looked up at him, saw the old pain etched in his features like scars carved into stone. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. The contact sent sparks through them both, electricity arcing between skin, the bond flaring bright and demanding. Kale's hand covered hers, large and warm and calloused from weapon practice. For a moment they simply stood there, connected by touch and tragedy, by losses that had shaped them into who they'd become. "I understand why you can't trust me easily," Rhea whispered. "After what happened to your father, how could you? And yet, I trust you." The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. "I shouldn't. You're a stranger who appeared at the worst possible moment with abilities that seemed too convenient. Every logical part of me says to keep you at arm's length, to question your every motive." His grip tightened on her hand. "But my wolf knows you, recognize you, and for the first time in 10 years, I don't feel alone." The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable and terrifying in its honesty. Rhea's own wolf surged forward, demanding she close the distance, claiming what was theirs by right of the mate bond. "Your Majesty," she began, but he cut her off with a shake of his head.
Kale.
"When we're alone, call me Kale." "Kale," she breathed, and his eyes darkened at the sound of his name on her lips, pupils dilating as his wolf rose to the surface. "We can't do this. You're king. I'm nobody. The realm would never accept." He kissed her. The world exploded into sensation. His mouth was firm and demanding, one hand cupping her face, while the other pulled her against him with barely restrained strength. Rhea gasped, and he deepened the kiss, tasting her thoroughly, claiming her mouth like he had every right. The mate bond roared in triumph, flooding them both with rightness, with the absolute certainty that this was meant to be. His wolf rumbled possessively, and she felt the answering call from her own beast. "Mark her, claim her, make her ours," his wolf demanded. Rhea's hands fisted in his tunic, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed that this was madness. His scent surrounded her, pine and smoke and something uniquely him that made her wolf keen with longing. Kale broke away with a growl, chest heaving, his amber eyes gone molten gold with his wolf's presence. "This is dangerous." "Then stop," Rhea challenged, even as she swayed toward him like a flower seeking sun. "I can't." His voice was rough, almost broken. "Moon goddess help me, Rhea, I can't stay away from you." "So don't." She reached for him again, desperate for the contact, for the way his touch made the bond settle from screaming demand to contented hum. But this time he caught her wrists, holding her at bay, even as everything in him strained toward her. "You don't understand what you're asking. If I claim you, if I give in to this bond, the political consequences." "I understand perfectly." Hurt bled through her voice, sharp and cutting. "You're an Alpha King, and I'm an Omega servant. The bond doesn't care about status, but you do. That's not fair. Isn't it?" She pulled free of his grip, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could hold the pieces of her heart together through physical force. "You feel this thing between us just as strongly as I do. But you'll never choose me, will you? Because choosing me means admitting you can't control everything, that fate has a say in your life. And control is all you have left after your father's death." The words struck true, each one a blade finding its mark. Kale's expression closed off, his walls slamming back into place with almost audible force. "Return to your chamber," he ordered, his voice gone cold and distant. The voice of a king, not a mate. "We're done here." Rhea left before the tears could fall, her wolf howling in anguish at the rejection, at the separation from their mate. Behind her, Kale stood alone among the flowers that healed and killed in equal measure, one hand pressed to his chest where the bond ached most fiercely. Above them, concealed in a tower window, Lady Isolde watched the entire exchange with calculating eyes. Her expression shifted from shock to fury to something far more dangerous, cold, calculated determination. She turned from the window and moved deeper into the shadows of Ravenwood's chambers, where her father waited with maps and poison and plans that had been years in the making. "We will move tonight," she said. before he does something foolish like actually claiming that Omega was his Luna. Lord Malachi nodded slowly, his silver-streaked beard catching candlelight. Then we'd best make certain there's no Luna left to claim. Chapter 5. Blood and Conspiracies. The body was discovered at dawn on the 8th day after the poisoning attempt. A hunter tracking deer through the northern forests stumbled upon it wedged between the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, throat cut from ear to ear in a gruesome smile. The corpse had been there for days. Animals had done their work, but enough remained to identify him as one of the missing kitchen servants. Commander Thane brought Rhea to his quarters to view the evidence, though he spared her the sight of the body itself. Instead, he showed her rubbings taken from the tree bark near where the man had died. Scratched deep into the wood, carved with what must have been the servant's final desperate effort, was a single word: Ravenwood. He managed to leave us a message before they finished him, Thane said grimly, his scarred hands spreading the parchment across his desk. This confirms our suspicions, but it's still not enough. One word scratched by a dying man won't convince the council to move against a pack as powerful as Ravenwood. We need more. I might be able to help with that. Cora's voice came from the doorway. She stood there with obvious terror written across her features, but determination burned brighter. Behind her cowered a young man, barely more than a boy, with haunted eyes that had seen too much. This is Finn. He serves House Ravenwood. Tell them what you told me. The boy's voice shook, but his words were clear enough. He spoke of conversations overheard in the dead of night, of Lord Malachi's whispered meetings with shadowy figures who came and went like ghosts, of Lady Isolde's cold determination to become Luna by any means necessary, including murder. And most damning of all, he'd stolen something. A risk that could cost him his life, but one he'd taken knowing he might need leverage someday. From within his tunic, Finn produced a leather pouch worn soft with age. Copies of Lord Malachi's private correspondences. I made them when he wasn't looking, knowing I might need them to buy my freedom someday. His hands trembled as he offered the pouch to Thane. I want out. I want protection from what they'll do when they discover I've betrayed them. Thane took the pouch with careful hands, as if it might explode. He spread the documents across his desk, and Rhea watched his expression darken with each page he read, watched the muscle in his jaw jump with barely contained rage. Your Majesty needs to see this immediately, Thane said, his voice tight with fury. He looked at Finn with something approaching respect. You'll have protection, boy. Hide him in the East Wing servants' quarters. He ordered a guard. No one from Ravenwood knows he's here. No one. Within the hour, Rhea found herself back in Cale's study. The king stood rigid by the window, documents clutched in his hand so tightly the parchment crumpled, his knuckles white with the force of his grip. The mate bond thrummed between them, amplified by his fury, pulling at her chest like hooks in flesh. She could feel his wolf raging beneath his skin, could sense the violence barely contained by his iron control. It's all here, Cale said, his voice deadly quiet in the way of storms before they break. The entire conspiracy. Lord Malachi Ravenwood has been planning this for years. The poisoning me was just the first step. He turned to face them, and the gold in his eyes had gone molten with rage. Once I was dead, Lady Isolde would claim the throne as my chosen Luna, backed by Ravenwood's military might. They'd eliminate any alphas who oppose them and rule through fear and manipulation. There's more, Your Majesty, Thane said grimly. He held up another document, this one yellowed with age. This correspondence is 3 years old. It references eliminating a small northern pack that had discovered too much about their preparations. A pack that posed a threat to their plans. The room seemed to tilt. Rhea gripped the edge of Cale's desk, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. What pack? Yours. Cale's voice was gentle now, but the words hit her like physical blows. He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands steadying her before she could fall. Rhea, it wasn't the rogues who destroyed your family. It was Ravenwood. They sent warriors to massacre everyone who might expose their conspiracy. And they used their political influence to manipulate the investigation, to classify it as a simple rogue attack, so no one would look deeper. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Her mother's healing hands stilled forever. Her father, the strongest man she'd ever known, cut down in his prime. Cade, only 15 years old with dreams of becoming a warrior, never given the chance to grow into the man he should have been. All of them died not by chance, not by random violence, but by calculated murder. They kill my family. The words came out broken, barely a whisper. They murdered them to protect a conspiracy. Yes. Kale's hands tightened on her shoulders, the mate bond flaring at the contact even through her shock and grief. I'm so sorry, Rhea. If I'd known, if I'd investigated more thoroughly. How could you have known? Her voice cracked like ice breaking. You said it yourself. They manipulated everything. Made it look like nothing more than another tragedy in a dangerous world. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. My mother used to sing to Cade when he had nightmares. My father taught me to track by moonlight. They had lives, futures, dreams. And Ravenwood took all of it. Rage replaced grief, hot and fierce and all-consuming. Her wolf surged forward, demanding blood, demanding justice for the pack slaughtered and unavenged. The bond between her and Kale pulsed with her fury, and she felt his wolf answer with its own savage need for vengeance. We need proof that will stand before the council, Thane said carefully, watching the rage building in both his king and the Omega who'd saved his life. These correspondences help, but Lord Malachi will claim they're forgeries. We need to force his hand, make him act openly where witnesses can see. Then we use me as bait. Rhea's voice steadied, hardening with resolve. Announce that the king has chosen me as his Luna. Make it public, make it official. Malachi and Isolde will panic. They'll move against me, and when they do, you'll have your proof. Absolutely not. Kale's refusal was instant and absolute. I won't risk you that way. It's not your choice. Rhea met his gaze unflinching, and he saw the steel beneath her gentle exterior. The survivor who'd walked through fire and come out forged into something unbreakable. This is about my family, my pack, my right to see justice done. Use me. Let them come. I'll be ready. The bond pulled taut between them, Kale's wolf howling in protest at the thought of his maiden danger. But he saw the moment she recognized the determination in her eyes, the same iron will that had survived a massacre and kept her going for 3 years. We'll protect you, he said finally, the words pulled from him like teeth. I swear it on my life, on my crown, on everything I am, they will not touch you. Then let's give them a reason to try, Rhea said, her voice cold as a winter stone. The announcement was made that evening before the assembled court. Kale stood on the dais with Rhea at his side and declared to the shocked nobility that he had chosen his Luna. The Omega servant who had saved his life, who had proven her worth beyond any candidate offered by politics or tradition. The hall erupted in chaos. Some alphas shouted in outrage, their faces purple with indignation. Others looked calculating, already adjusting their alliances to accommodate this unexpected shift in power. And at the back of the hall, Lord Malachi Ravenwood's face went white with fury while Lady Isolde's expression twisted into something ugly and desperate. The claiming ceremony will take place in 3 days, Kale continued, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. Until then, my chosen Luna will be housed in the Eastern Tower for her protection as we prepare for the ritual. Rhea felt dozens of eyes on her, some curious, some hostile, some measuring her worth like livestock at market. But she kept her chin raised, her hand steady in Kale's, and refused to show fear. As guards escorted her toward the tower later, Cora found her in the corridor. I'm coming with you, Cora said, brooking no argument. I don't care what protocols say. You're my friend, and I won't let you face this alone. It's dangerous, Rhea warned, but warmth bloomed in her chest at the fierce loyalty in her friend's eyes.
Good.
Cora linked their arms together. I've lived too safely for too long. Time to be brave. The tower room was spacious and well-appointed, but still a cage. Rhea stood by the window as night fell, watching torchlight flicker across the bailey below. The mate bond stretched between her and Kale like a rope pulled taut, growing more painful with each moment of separation. Her chest ached with it, her wolf whining pitifully, desperate for the comfort of her mate's presence. In his own chambers, Kale paced like a caged beast, one hand pressed to his sternum where the bond burned hottest. He'd known mate bonds could be intense, had heard stories of bonded pairs who couldn't bear separation. But nothing had prepared him for this agony, this gnawing emptiness that threatened to drive him mad. "It doesn't matter what the council thinks," he growled to Thane, who'd remained as witness to his alpha's unraveling. "It doesn't matter that she's Omega, that she is no pack, that tradition says I should choose differently. She's mine. The moon goddess chose her for me, and I was a fool to deny it even for a moment. Then claim her properly when this is over," Thane said quietly. "Truly claim her. Make her your Luna in every sense that matters. The realm will adapt or face your wrath." In the tower, Rhea pressed her palm to the cold stone and whispered to the mate she couldn't reach. "Come back to me. When this is over, please come back to me." The moon rose full and bright over Stoneheart Fortress, the goddess whose bond had brought them together, watching over her children with ancient, knowing eyes. And in the shadows of the castle, in chambers draped with Ravenwood's colors, Lord Malachi and Lady Isolde met in secret. Their faces were twisted with rage and desperation as they planned murder by moonlight. "We can't let this claim happen," Isolde hissed, pacing before the fire like a caged wolf. "If he marks her, if he completes the bond, we'll never get another chance. The realm will accept her, and all our years of planning will be for nothing." "Then we move tonight," Malachi said, his voice cold and calculating. "We have men loyal to our cause, warriors who've been paid well for their discretion. They'll enter through the passage I arranged with that full guard. Kill the Omega, make it look like she was caught in some lover's quarrel or servant dispute. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be long gone. And if the king comes for us?" Isolde's voice held a tremor of fear. "He won't have proof. Without the girl, without witnesses, it's our word against suspicions." Malachi's smile was cruel. "And we've spent years building alliances, placing sympathetic ears throughout the realm. Even if he suspects us, he won't be able to prove it." They didn't know that young Finn, pressed against the wall outside their door, heard every word. Didn't know that he'd already begun running toward the east wing, his heart hammering with terror, desperate to warn someone before blood was spilled. The pieces were all in motion now, assassins preparing weapons, a boy racing through shadows, and in the tower, an Omega who'd survived one massacre preparing to face another. This time, she wouldn't run. Chapter 6: Moonlight and Murder. The attack came 2 hours past midnight, when shadows grew longest and the moon hung pale and indifferent in the star-scattered sky. Rhea woke to the sound of steel scraping against stone, a whisper of death that her wolf recognized before her conscious mind caught up. She rolled from the bed just as the door burst inward, splinters of wood exploding across the room like shrapnel. 5 figures in dark cloaks poured through the doorway, blades gleaming in the torchlight that spilled from the corridor beyond. Cora screamed from her cot near the fireplace, scrambling backward as the first assassin lunged toward her with blade raised. Rhea shifted without thought, her human form dissolving into fur and fawn in the space between heartbeats. Her copper-red wolf was smaller than the male's, built for speed and agility rather than raw power, but desperation made her deadly. She threw herself at the man threatening Cora, teeth sinking into his sword arm with enough force to feel bone crunch beneath her jaws. He shrieked, dropping his weapon with a clatter that rang like bells. Another assassin grabbed her by the scruff, hauling her off with brutal strength and hurling her against the wall. Pain exploded through her ribs where she hit stone, white-hot and blinding. But she twisted midair, landing on her feet despite the agony. 2 more rushed toward Cora, who'd grabbed a fire poker and was swinging it wildly, her voice cracking with terror, but her stance defiant. "Get away from her." Cora's scream held more courage than fear, and Rhea's heart swelled with fierce pride even as dread clawed at her throat. Rhea remembered the small leather pouch she'd hidden beneath her pillow, the one containing monkshood powder she'd kept from the garden visit, insurance against a moment exactly like this. She shifted back to human form long enough to grab it, her hands shaking violently, then hurled the contents at the nearest assassin's face. The fine powder exploded in a cloud of purple death. He clawed at his eyes, screaming as the poison burned through delicate membranes, already beginning the slow process of shutting down his nervous system. But there were still 4 others, and Rhea was tiring fast. Blood matted her side where she'd hit the wall, and each breath sent knives through her ribs. One of the assassins drove his blade toward Cora's chest in a strike meant to kill, and time seemed to slow to a crawl. Cora threw herself sideways at the last possible second. The blade caught her shoulder instead of her heart, but blood bloomed bright and terrible across her nightgown, a spreading crimson flower that made Rhea's vision go red with rage. No! Rhea's scream was part human, part wolf, a sound of pure anguish and fury. She launched herself at the attacker with renewed ferocity, all fangs and claws and mindless rage born of love and desperation. They crashed together in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the floor in a savage dance of survival. His blade scored her side, hot pain lancing through muscle, but she got her teeth around his throat and bit down. The taste of copper flooded her mouth. His body went rigid, then limp. Miles away in his chambers, Cale bolted upright as agony tore through the mate bond like lightning through flesh. Not his pain, hers. Terror and fury flooded the connection in waves that made his vision blur, made his wolf explode forward with a roar that shook the stone walls themselves. Thane! His bellow brought the commander running from his post outside the door, already reaching for his sword. The tower. They're attacking her. Now. They ran through corridors lit only by scattered torches, Cale shifting mid-stride into his massive black wolf. His beast was twice the size of any normal shifter, an alpha in his prime, fury given form and fong. Guards fell in behind them, but Cale outdistanced them all, driven by primal need to reach his mate before.
No.
Don't think about it. She's alive. You can feel her, through the bond. She's fighting. She's alive. He burst through what remained of the tower door to find carnage painted across stone and flesh. 2 assassins lay dead or dying. One with his throat torn out, another convulsing from poison that turned his lips purple. Rhea stood in wolf form, blood matting her copper fur, swaying with exhaustion as 3 remaining attackers closed in for the kill. Cora lay crumpled against the wall, crimson spreading across the stones beneath her in a pool that grew larger with each passing second. Cale's roar shook dust from the rafters, primal and terrible and full of promises written in blood. The assassins turned, and he saw fear break through their determination, saw them finally understand the magnitude of their mistake. But it was far too late for mercy. He was upon them before they could raise their weapons, all tooth and claw and royal fury given flesh. The first died with Cale's jaws locked around his spine, the vertebrae snapping like dry kindling. The second tried to run and made it 3 staggering steps before Cale brought him down, his claws raking deep furrows through flesh and muscle. Thane burst through the doorway with guards at his back, tackling the 3rd assassin before Cale could tear him limb from limb. "We need one alive for questioning, Your Majesty." Thane's shout barely penetrated the red haze of Cale's rage. It took everything Cale had to shift back to human form to resist his wolf's demand for complete and utter slaughter. He stood naked and covered in blood that wasn't his own, chest heaving with the effort of restraint, and turned to find Rhea. She'd collapsed, her wolf form giving way to reveal pale skin covered in wounds that leaked crimson onto stone. Cale was beside her in an instant, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted the violence he'd just unleashed. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair, feeling the mate bond settle from screaming agony to bearable ache now that she was in his arms. "You're safe now. I've got you." "Cora," Rhea gasped, her voice raw and broken. "Help Cora. Please. Get the healers." Thane barked at the guards who'd crowded into the doorway, their eyes wide with shock at the carnage. "Both of them now." And bring chains for these two. The survivors go to the dungeons immediately. The healers arrived within minutes, their hands glowing with the soft silver light of healing magic. They worked on both women simultaneously, one tending to Cora's shoulder wound while another examined Rhea's injuries with gentle efficiency. Kale refused to let her go, refused to move more than arm's length away while they worked. The mate bond thrummed between them, settling into a rhythm that spoke of survival, of battles fought and won. "She'll live," the healer said finally, relief evident in her voice. "The wounds are deep but clean. No poison in the blade. Thank the goddess. She'll need rest and time, but she'll recover." "And the other one?" Kale demanded, his voice rough. "The shoulder wound is serious but not fatal. We've stopped the bleeding and closed the worst of it. She's young and strong. She'll heal." The healer met his eyes. "They're both lucky to be alive, Your Majesty. Very lucky." By dawn, the surviving assassins had been dragged to the dungeons. Under Thane's ruthless interrogation, methods the commander would never speak of openly, they broke like twigs under pressure. Yes, they'd been hired by Lord Malachi Ravenwood. Yes, Lady Isolde had given the direct order. Yes, they'd been promised fortunes and threatened with the murder of their families if they refused. And yes, Lord Malachi had placed a loyal servant in the guard rotation weeks ago, someone who'd accepted Ravenwood's gold and opened the tower door from the inside, betraying his oath and his king for coins that would never spend in the afterlife he was about to meet. By the time the sun rose fully over Stoneheart Fortress, Kale had summoned every alpha in the castle to the Great Hall. They assembled with obvious reluctance, many still rubbing sleep from their eyes, but none dared refuse the king's command when it came with such cold fury. Lord Malachi and Lady Isolde were brought in chains, their fine clothes disheveled, their faces masks of barely controlled panic. The guards who escorted them kept hands on sword hilts, ready for any attempt at escape or violence. Kale stood on the dais, Thane at his side, and the full weight of his authority pressed down on the assembly like a physical force. The air itself seemed to tremble with his barely leashed rage. Last night, Kale's voice carried through the vaulted space like the toll of a funeral bell. Assassins infiltrated my fortress and attempted to murder my chosen Luna. They were captured. They confessed. And they named their employers. He gestured, and Thane laid out the evidence with methodical precision. Finn's stolen correspondence, detailing years of conspiracy. The carved message from the murdered servant. The sworn testimony of the captured assassins, their confessions witnessed by multiple guards. And most damning, a confession Thane had extracted from Malachi's planted guard, who'd broken completely and told them everything in exchange for a quick death instead of a slow one. Lord Malachi Ravenwood, Kale's voice held the weight of judgment itself, cold and absolute. You stand accused of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, and the murder of innocents. How do you answer? Malachi's composure cracked like ice under pressure. These documents are forgeries. That boy Finn is a liar who bears a grudge against our house. The assassins were tortured into false confession. His voice rose desperately, hands clenched into fists despite the chains. I am a loyal servant of the crown. I would never. Then explain, Kale interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. Why your own guard confessed to accepting your gold to betray mine. Explain why your servants were overheard discussing the elimination of witnesses. Explain the correspondence dated 3 years ago, ordering the massacre of a northern pack that had discovered your treasonous plans. Silence fell like a shroud. Malachi's face went through several expressions, denial, calculation, desperation, before something shifted behind his eyes. He looked at his daughter, and Rhea saw the moment he made his choice. Your Majesty, Malachi said, his voice taking on a tone of reluctant confession, I admit some of my servants may have acted without my knowledge. Perhaps they misunderstood orders, or took initiative they shouldn't have. But I would never, he paused, seeming to gather courage. Perhaps my daughter was involved. Perhaps Lady Isolde orchestrated this plot without my awareness. She was obsessed with becoming Luna, consumed by ambition. I take responsibility for failing to notice her descent into madness. The betrayal was absolute, complete. A father throwing his own child to the wolves, literally, to save his own skin. Isolde stared at Malachi as if seeing him for the first time, something breaking behind her ice-blue eyes. When she laughed, the sound held no humor, only the sharp edge of shattered illusions and bitter recognition. "You coward," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You spineless, pathetic coward." She turned to Kale, her chin raised in defiance despite the chains and the certain death awaiting her. "You want the truth?"
Fine.
"Yes, I ordered the assassins. Yes, I planned to kill you with poison at the feast. And yes, my father orchestrated everything from the very beginning." She smiled then, a knife-sharp expression full of malice and broken dreams. "He wanted the throne, wanted the power, and he promised me I'd be queen. We killed that northern pack 3 years ago because they discovered our plans, sent warriors to massacre everyone who might talk. We murdered the servants who handled your platter. We did it all together, father and daughter, plotting in the dark while you played at being king." Her voice rose, cracking with fury and desperation. "And if I'm going to burn for it, father, so will you. We're in this together, all the way to the executioner's block." The hall erupted in chaos. Alphas who'd allied with Ravenwood went pale, scrambling to distance themselves from the confession. Malachi lunged for his daughter, screaming denials, but guards restrained him with brutal efficiency. Kale let the pandemonium rage for a moment before his alpha command cut through it all like a blade through silk. Silence. Every wolf in the room felt the weight of that order, submission rippling through their bones whether they wanted it or not. The hall fell into absolute quiet, broken only by Malachi's ragged breathing and Isolde's bitter laughter. "Edmund and Isolde Ravenwood," Kale pronounced, using the ancient formula of judgment. "You are guilty of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, and the murder of innocents. The sentence is death by the dawn blade. You will be executed at first light." The executions took place in the fortress courtyard as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Rhea watched from a tower window, bandaged, but insisting on bearing witness. When the headsman's blade fell once, then twice, she felt something in her chest finally release, a knot of grief and rage that had lived there for 3 years. It wasn't closed. Not truly. Her family couldn't be brought back, and justice couldn't erase the hole their deaths had left in her soul. But it was enough to know their murderers would never harm anyone else. Enough to know that lies had been dragged into light and punished. Kale found her there afterward, wrapped her carefully in his arms despite her injuries, and held her as she finally let herself cry for her mother's healing hands, for her father's strength, for Kate's dreams that would never come true. And for the first time in 3 years, surrounded by the warmth of her mate's embrace, Rhea felt something other than grief. She felt hope. Chapter 7. Claiming Under Silver Moon. 3 days after the executions, Stoneheart Fortress transformed. The shadow of Ravenwood's treachery had lifted like morning fog burned away by sun, and those who remained, nobles who'd proven their loyalty, or at least their neutrality, gathered with cautious curiosity beneath ancient vaulted ceilings. The great hall glowed with candlelight and anticipation, hundreds of flames casting dancing shadows across stone walls carved with the history of kingdoms risen and fallen. Rhea stood in chambers that had once belonged to queens long dead, her wounds still healing beneath the ceremonial gown they draped across her shoulders. The fabric was like liquid moonlight, silver silk embroidered with copper thread that matched the fire of her hair. It flowed around her like water, clinging to curves and cascading to the floor in waves of shimmering light. She barely recognized herself in the mirror, this woman who looked like she belonged among nobility. "You're beautiful," Cora said softly, adjusting the train with her good arm. Her shoulder was still bandaged, but she'd insisted on being here despite the healer's protests. Like something out of the old stories my grandmother used to tell. "I feel like an imposter," Rhea admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago, I was a kitchen servant. Now I'm supposed to be Luna? You are never just a servant. Cora met her eyes in the mirror, fierce loyalty burning in her gaze. You were always meant for more. You just needed the right person to see it. And he sees you, Rhea. Moon goddess above. That man sees you. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thane entered, his formal uniform pristine, his expression softer than Rhea had ever seen it. It's time, Lady Rhea. The court awaits. The great hall blazed with light when Rhea entered, and every head turned to watch her approach. The assembled nobles stood in their finest, silks and jewels glittering in the candlelight, but she saw only one person. Kale waited on the dais at the far end of the hall, and the sight of him stole the breath from her lungs. He wore formal attire of black and silver that made him look every inch the alpha king he was. His dark hair fell loose around his shoulders, the silver threads catching light like starlight. His amber eyes tracked her approach with an intensity that made her wolf sing with recognition and need. The mate bond thrummed between them, stronger now after days of healing and proximity. It pulled her forward, step by step down an aisle lined with witnesses who would judge whether an Omega was worthy to stand beside their king. Let them judge. She'd survived worse than their disapproval. When she reached the dais, Kale descended the 3 steps to meet her at eye level. For a moment, they simply stood there, Alpha King and Omega Servant, fated mates who'd found each other despite impossible odds. My lords and ladies, Kale's voice carried easily through the space, commanding attention without effort. We gather tonight to witness the claiming of my Luna. Some of you have questioned this choice. Some have called it madness to elevate an Omega to such a position. His gaze swept the assembly, daring anyone to speak against her now. You see her rank. You see her lack of family connections, her absence of political alliances. And you think I'm weak for choosing her. The silence was absolute, tension crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. Let me tell you what I see, Kale continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. I see a woman who risked execution to save my life, who detected poison that would have killed your king and thrown this realm into chaos. I see someone who survived the massacre of her entire pack, a massacre orchestrated by the very traitors we just executed, who rebuilt herself from ashes and grief into someone stronger than steel. He took Rhea's hand, and the contact sent sparks racing up her arm. I see a woman who fought assassins with nothing but courage and cunning, who protected her friend even when wounded and outnumbered. Strength doesn't come from the circumstances of your birth. It comes from what you do when everything is taken from you. It comes from choosing to stand when falling would be easier. Thane stepped forward, his voice ringing clear and strong. As commander of the King's Guard and Beta of this realm, I support this union. Lady Rhea has proven her worth beyond any doubt. Any who question her place question their king. The statement hung heavy with warning. Slowly, other voices rose in agreement, not all, but enough. The nobles who'd allied with Ravenwood kept their silence, their shame too fresh, their positions too precarious to risk further offense. The moon goddess chose her for me, Kale said, his voice gentling as he looked at Rhea. And I was a fool to deny that truth even for a moment. Politics be damned. Tradition be damned. This woman is my mate, chosen by fate and confirmed by my own heart. I will have no other. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. The ritual words came next, ancient and weighted with power that transcended simple ceremony. Do you accept this claim? Kale asked, his amber eyes burning into hers. Do you accept me as your mate, your alpha, your partner in all things that matter? Will you stand beside me as Luna, sharing my burdens and my crown, my struggles and my triumphs, until the moon goddess herself calls us home? Rhea's throat tightened with emotion. She thought of her mother's gentle hands, her father's strength, Cade's bright laughter cut short too soon. They'd never see this moment, would never know that their daughter had found something worth living for beyond simple survival. But somehow, she felt them with her. Their love, a warmth in her chest, their pride, a weight that steadied her rather than crushed her. I accept, she whispered. Then louder, her voice carrying through the hall with unexpected strength. "I accept." The hall erupted in howls, wolves giving voice to approval, the ancient acknowledgement of a bond recognized and celebrated. Kale pulled her close, and when his lips met hers, the mate bond exploded into something transcendent. His wolf and hers recognized each other, called to each other, demanded completion of what had begun the moment their eyes first met in chaos and poison. The kiss deepened, claiming and promising in equal measure, and Rhea felt herself falling into him, with a rightness that made her chest ache. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale rested his forehead against hers and whispered words meant only for her ears. "Come with me. The ceremony is traditional and necessary, but what happens after? That's just for us." They completed the public rituals with careful precision, playing their parts before the assembled court. The exchange of vows before witnesses, each word a binding promise. The symbolic sharing of bread and wine, representing sustenance and celebration, pack and prosperity. The presentation of Rhea to the assembly as Luna, her new title spoken aloud for all to hear and acknowledge. Through it all, the mate bond pulled tighter, the need for true claiming growing unbearable with each moment of restraint. Finally, blessedly, they were allowed to withdraw. Kale led her through corridors that had become familiar over the past weeks, toward chambers that would now be theirs to share. The moment the heavy door closed behind them, shutting out the world and its demands, his control shattered like glass. He pressed her against the wall with barely restrained urgency, his mouth claiming hers with bruising intensity. His hands mapped her body through the ceremonial gown, learning her curves, memorizing every gasp and shiver he drew from her lips. "I need you," he growled against her throat, his wolf riding close to the surface, golden eyes bleeding through amber, fangs elongating with the beast's presence. "Moon goddess, help me, Rhea. I need to complete this bond before I lose what's left of my mind." "Then claim me," she breathed, her own wolf surging forward with desperate hunger. Her hands fisted in his formal jacket, pulling him closer until no space remained between them. "Mark me. Make me yours in every way that matters." They shed clothing with desperate urgency, fabric tearing in their haste to feel skin against skin. The ceremonial gown, so carefully constructed, so expensive, fell in a pool of silver at their feet, forgotten in the overwhelming need to complete what fate had started. When Kale lifted her, Rhea wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively, gasping as their bodies finally joined. The sensation was overwhelming, pleasure and rightness and completion all at once, as if pieces of herself she hadn't known were missing suddenly clicked into place. He carried her to the bed without breaking their connection, laying her down with surprising gentleness despite the feral hunger burning in his eyes. His hands bracketed her head, caging her beneath him, and when he moved, when he claimed her with slow, deliberate thrusts that made her see stars, she understood why they called it mating rather than simply coupling. This was more than physical, more than pleasure, though moon goddess, there was plenty of that. This was souls recognizing each other, two halves of one whole finally coming together after lifetimes of searching. "Tell me if it's too much," Kale said, even as his hips moved faster, driving deeper. His voice was rough, barely human. "Tell me if I hurt you." "More," Rhea demanded, her nails raking down his back hard enough to draw blood. "Don't hold back. I can take it. I want all of you." Something in him snapped, the last thread of control burning away like paper in flame. He claimed her with primal intensity, each thrust accompanied by possessive growls that resonated in her chest. The mate bond sang between them, weaving their souls together with threads of gold and silver, binding them in ways that transcended flesh. When his teeth sank into the junction of her neck and shoulder, marking her as his, claiming her before the moon goddess herself, Rhea screamed his name. The pleasure was so intense it bordered on pain, her body arching beneath him as the marking completed. She felt it settle into her bones, into her very soul, the knowledge that she belonged to him and he to her, for as long as they both drew breath. Her own wolf surged forward, demanding reciprocation. When her teeth found his shoulder, when she marked him in return with savage possession, Kale roared. His hips stuttered, his release flooding through her as the bond settled into place with a finality that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. They collapsed together, tangled and trembling, breathing hard as aftershocks rolled through them both. The mate bond hummed with satisfaction, no longer screaming for completion, but singing softly with contentment. Kale traced the mark on her neck with gentle fingers, satisfaction rumbling through his chest like distant thunder. Mine, he murmured, the words both possession and promise. My mate. My Luna. Mine. Yours, Rhea agreed, her own fingers finding his mark, watching him shiver at the contact. And you're mine, Alpha King. Don't forget that part. Never. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender in contrast to the claim that had just shaken them both to their cores. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, Rhea.
Hope. Trust.
The belief that good things can still happen despite all the darkness. We've both lost too much, Rhea said quietly, curling into his warmth. But maybe we can build something new together. Something better than what came before. We will, Kale promised, pulling her closer. We'll build it together and nothing will tear it down. Outside, the moon shone full and bright through the windows, blessing the newly bonded pair with her silver light. And somewhere in the space between consciousness and sleep, Rhea felt her mother's presence, not as grief, but as love that transcended death itself. Be happy, little flame, her mother's voice whispered through memory. You've earned it. The next morning, Rhea held her first official act as Luna. She summoned Cora to the throne room, a space that still felt too grand, too imposing for someone who'd spent 3 years scrubbing pots in kitchens. Cora entered with obvious nervousness, curtsying awkwardly. You wanted to see me, Your Grace? Rise, Rhea said, unable to suppress a smile at her friend's discomfort. You're my friend, Cora. You don't need to bow to me. Actually, she does, Kale corrected gently from his throne beside hers. His hand rested over hers on the armrest, a casual intimacy that still made her heart skip. You're Luna now. Certain protocols must be observed, at least in public. Fine, Rhea conceded with mock annoyance. But only in public. She turned back to Cora, her expression growing serious. I'm creating a new position, lady-in-waiting to Luna. The role comes with chambers in the royal wing, a generous stipend, and significant influence in court matters. I want someone I trust by my side, someone who'll tell me when I'm being an idiot.
She paused.
Interested. Cora's eyes filled with tears. I'd be honored beyond measure.
Good.
Because we have work to do. Rhea's expression shifted, determination replacing sentiment. I'm establishing a new council, one that represents all ranks, not just alphas. Betas, omegas, even common servants will have voices in how this kingdom is run. Too many people have been ignored for too long, their concerns dismissed because of arbitrary hierarchy. That changes now. The reforms took months to implement fully, resistance meeting her at every turn from traditionalists who couldn't imagine a world where omegas had value beyond servitude. But the foundation was laid that day, a kingdom that had been built on rigid hierarchy beginning, slowly, to shift towards something more just. And through it all, Kale stood beside her, supporting her vision, using his authority to silence the loudest critics, proving that an Alpha King could love an Omega Luna without diminishing either of them. Chapter 8. Seeds of Change. 2 moons passed in a blur of council meetings and subtle power shifts. The new representative council met weekly in a chamber that had once been used only for alpha assemblies, now filled with voices that had never before been heard in halls of power. Rhea sat at the head of the table with Kale at her side, listening as a beta merchant presented concerns about trade routes being monopolized by noble families. Beside him, an Omega healer spoke passionately about the lack of resources for lower-ranked packs. A common guard detailed security weaknesses that his superiors had dismissed for years. It was messy, often frustrating. Arguments erupted over matters that seemed trivial to some but were life and death to others. but it was undeniably more, just than what had come before. The old guard will never fully accept this, Thane warned one evening after a particularly contentious session. You're threatening power structures that have existed for centuries. Some will resist until their dying breath. Let them resist, Kale said, his arm around Rhea's waist as they stood overlooking the fortress from their private balcony. The realm will adapt or face consequences. My Luna has shown me that strength comes in forms I'd never considered, that wisdom isn't the sole province of alphas, that solutions can come from unexpected places. Rhea leaned into his warmth, watching the sun set in shades of amber and rose. Change is always uncomfortable, but stagnation is death. She paused, her hand drifting to her stomach in a gesture that had become unconscious over the past weeks. We're building something that will outlast us. Something our children can be proud of. The word hung between them, children. Neither had spoken it aloud before, though the possibility had been present since their claiming. Kale's hand covered hers, large and warm over her abdomen. Are you? He couldn't quite finish the question, hope and fear warring in his voice. I don't know yet, Rhea admitted, but I've been feeling different. Nothing concrete, just instinct. She turned to face him, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his amber eyes. Would you want that? A child. With you? His voice went rough with emotion. I want everything with you, Rhea. Children, a future, decades of mornings waking beside you and nights falling asleep in your arms. His hands framed her face with heartbreaking gentleness. But only if you want it too. Only if you're ready. I'm terrified, she confessed. My mother died protecting me. My father died protecting our pack. What if I can't keep a child safe? What if this world is too cruel, too dangerous? Then we make it less cruel, Kale said firmly. We make it safer, more just, worthy of the children we might bring into it. That's what all these reforms are about, isn't it? Building something better. 3 weeks later, the healer confirmed what Rhea's instincts had whispered. She was pregnant, barely 6 weeks along, but unmistakable to someone trained in reading the body's subtle signs. The announcement rippled through the court like wind through wheat. Celebration from those who supported the union, begrudging acceptance from traditionalists who could no longer deny that the moon goddess herself had blessed this match. An heir was coming, proof that fate had chosen correctly despite all their protests. But not everyone celebrated. In the Northern Territories, displaced Ravenwood allies gathered in secret, nursing their wounds and their rage. The execution of their lord and his daughter had left a power vacuum, and those who'd profited from Ravenwood's schemes now found themselves exposed and vulnerable. The Omega whore carries his child. One alpha spat, slamming his fist on the table hard enough to rattle cups. Everything we worked for is gone because that kitchen servant got lucky. Not luck, another corrected grimly. That girl has abilities, poison detection, enhanced senses. She's more dangerous than she appears. Then we eliminate her before the child is born, a third suggested. Without an heir, without Luna, the king weakens. We could.
No.
The eldest among them, Lord Garrett, whose lands bordered the former Ravenwood territory, held up a hand. Direct action failed before. It will fail again, and this time the king's vengeance will be absolute. We need subtlety. Patience. His eyes gleamed with cold calculation. Let the girl have her child. Let them feel safe, comfortable. And when their guard finally lowers, he smiled without humor. That's when we strike. Rhea knew nothing of these whispers. Her world had narrowed to council sessions, to learning the impossible complexity of ruling, and to the changes happening in her body that both terrified and awed her. She stood in the medicinal gardens on a crisp morning, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her abdomen. 4 months along now, and the pregnancy had begun to show, a small bump that made her formal gowns fit awkwardly, that made servants whisper and smile when they thought she couldn't hear. No, gently, she corrected a young student who was harvesting comfrey root with too much enthusiasm. If you damage the roots, the plant can't regenerate. We take only what we need, leaving enough for next season. There were 12 students gathered today, a mixture of ranks and backgrounds, all eager to learn the healing arts that Rhea had inherited from her mother. She taught them with the same patience her mother had shown her, honoring that legacy through education rather than grief. Lady Luna, Cora appeared at the garden gate, her shoulder fully healed now though a thin scar remained as reminder. The delegation from the Eastern Territories arrived early. They're requesting an immediate audience. Rhea sighed, reluctant to leave her plants and students for the political maneuvering that seemed endless. But this was her role now, Luna, advisor, voice for those who'd never had one before. Tell them I'll be there within the hour, she said. Let me finish this lesson first. Already done, Cora said with a knowing smile. I scheduled them for this afternoon and told the head servant to prepare refreshments. You've been out here since dawn, Rhea. Come inside, have breakfast, rest before the politics begin. You're too good to me. Someone has to be. You'd work yourself into collapse otherwise. Cora linked arms with her as they walked toward the fortress. How are you feeling today? Any nausea? Not as bad as last week, Rhea admitted, her hand going to her stomach in that protective gesture that had become a habit. The healer says everything is progressing well. Strong heartbeat. Active. She smiled despite herself. This little one kicks like they're trying to escape already. Like a mother, like a child, Cora said warmly. Stubborn from the start. They found Kale in the council chamber, bent over maps with Thane. He looked up as they entered, and the smile that crossed his face made Rhea's heart skip despite months of marriage. He still looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. There you are, he said, crossing to kiss her forehead. His hand joined hers on her belly, and she felt the baby respond with a solid kick that made them both laugh. Our child is restless today. Takes after both of us, Rhea teased. Stubborn and impatient. Gods help us, Kale murmured, but his eyes shone with love and anticipation that made her chest ache with fullness. Thane cleared his throat diplomatically. The Eastern delegation brings news, Your Majesties. Not all of it good. The commander spread additional maps across the table, trade routes marked in red, indicating disruptions and attacks. There have been incidents along the northern border. Merchant caravans attacked, guards killed, goods stolen. The pattern suggests organization rather than random banditry. Kale's expression darkened. Ravenwood loyalists. Possibly. Or opportunists taking advantage of the power vacuum their executions created. Thane pointed to several marked locations. Either way, we need to address it before it escalates. The Eastern Alphas are demanding action, protection for their trade, justice for the attacks. Increase patrols along those routes, Kale ordered. Double the guard on any caravan carrying valuable goods. And send scouts to investigate. I want to know who's behind this and why. There's more, Thane said hesitantly. There are rumors circulating in the Northern Territories. Whispers that Luna's pregnancy is unnatural. That an Omega shouldn't be able to carry an Alpha's child, that it's a sign of the moon goddess's displeasure. Rhea's hand tightened on her stomach, the wolf rising with protective fury. That's ridiculous. Omega women have borne Alpha children throughout history. It's rare, but not unnatural. I know that. You know that. But frightened people will believe anything that confirms their prejudices. Thane's expression was grim. Someone is spreading these rumors deliberately, trying to undermine your position and the legitimacy of your child. Then we counter them, Kale said flatly. Publicly. We invite the most respected healers in the realm to examine Rhea, to confirm that the pregnancy is healthy and normal. We make it impossible for these rumors to take root. That would mean exposing her to potential enemies, Thane warned. I'm not made of glass, Rhea interjected. And I won't let lies go unchallenged when they threaten my child. She met Kale's eyes, seeing her own determination reflected there. We do this publicly, transparently. Let them see that there's nothing unnatural about an Omega Luna carrying the king's heir. The examination took place a week later in the Great Hall, witnessed by representatives from every major pack in the kingdom. 3 of the most respected healers in the realm, Two women and one man, all with decades of experience, examined Rhea with professional thoroughness while dozens of eyes watched. It was humiliating, exposing, but necessary. Rhea endured it with her chin raised, refusing to show weakness before those who wished to see her fail. When the healers finally stepped back, the eldest, a woman named Maris with silver hair and kind eyes, addressed the assembly with absolute authority. Luna's pregnancy is completely natural and progressing exactly as expected. The child is healthy, the mother is strong, and there is absolutely nothing unusual or unnatural about this conception. Her gaze swept the crowd, daring anyone to contradict her. Any rumors suggesting otherwise are born of ignorance or malice, not medical fact. The other two healers nodded agreement, adding their own confirmations. The whispers didn't stop immediately. Prejudice rarely died quickly, but they lost their power. It was hard to maintain a conspiracy theory when the most respected experts in the realm publicly declared it false. That evening, Rhea returned to the medicinal gardens, her favorite sanctuary. The autumn air held a bite now, warning of winter's approach. She knelt among the herbs, her pregnant belly making the position awkward, but she'd always felt closest to her mother here among the plants that healed and harmed in equal measure. Kale found her there as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. He stood watching for a moment, this woman who'd transformed his life so completely, who carried his child and his heart with equal care. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her on the cool earth. "Everything," she admitted. "How much has changed in just 6 months? How impossible this all seemed when I was just a kitchen servant watching the Luna selection from the shadows." She looked at him, her green eyes catching the fading light. "I was nobody, Kale. An omega without a pack, without family, without any reason to hope for more than survival. And now I'm your Luna, carrying your child, helping to reshape a kingdom." "You were never nobody," Kale said fiercely. "You saved my life. You survived impossible loss and built yourself into someone remarkable. I just gave you a platform to show the realm what I already saw, that you're extraordinary." "We gave each other a reason to hope again," Rhea corrected, taking his hand and placing it over the swell where their child grew. "After everything we'd lost, we found each other. Found something worth fighting for." The baby kicked against Kale's palm, strong and insistent, and his face lit with wonder that never seemed to fade no matter how many times he felt it. "I love you," he said, the words still precious despite being spoken daily. "I love you for your courage, your compassion, your refusal to accept injustice. I love you for saving me in more ways than just from poison. And I love you for giving me a future I'd stopped believing in." "I love you too," Rhea whispered. "My mate. My alpha. My impossible, stubborn, wonderful king." They sat together as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by plants that represented the duality of their world, beauty and danger, healing and harm, life and death growing side by side. Above them, the moon rose full and bright, the goddess whose bond had brought them together watching over her children with eternal patience. And in the distance, in territories where displaced nobles nursed their grudges, plans were being laid that would test everything they'd built. But for tonight, in the garden where past and present intertwined, Rhea and Kale simply held each other and dreamed of the future they were creating. One stubborn reform, one loving moment, one kick from their unborn child at a time. Chapter 9: Memorial Stones. Winter arrived with bitter cold and snow that blanketed Stoneheart Fortress in pristine white. Rhea stood at the window of their chambers, 6 months pregnant now, watching frost patterns form on the glass like delicate lace. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the child move within, strong kicks that sometimes stole her breath, reminders of the life growing inside her. "You're up early," Kale's voice came from behind her, rough with sleep. His arms wrapped around her from behind, hands covering hers over their child. "Couldn't sleep?" "Dreams," Rhea admitted. "About my family, about the memorial." She leaned back against his warmth, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "The northern delegation sent word yesterday. The construction is finally complete. The memorial for her pack, built on the land where they'd lived and died, funded by Kale's treasury and constructed by craftsmen he'd personally selected. It had been Rhea's idea, born from the need to honor those who'd been erased from history, to ensure their names would never be forgotten. "I want to see it," she said quietly. "Before winter makes travel impossible, before the baby comes and I'm too heavy to make the journey. I need to see it finished, Kale. I need to stand where they fell and tell them I'm sorry I survived when they didn't. Tell them I'm trying to make their deaths mean something." Kale pressed a kiss to her temple, his beard scratching gently against her skin. "Then we go tomorrow. Together. I won't let you face those ghosts alone." The journey north took 4 days by carriage, slower than usual because of Rhea's pregnancy and the snow-covered roads. They traveled with an escort of 20 guards, Thane among them, and Cora insisted on coming despite the difficult conditions. "You're my Luna and my friend," Cora had said when Rhea tried to dissuade her. "I'm not letting you face this alone." End of discussion. The landscape changed as they traveled, forests growing thicker and mountains rising like ancient sentinels against the winter sky. Rhea recognized it even after 3 years, the shape of the land calling to something deep in her bones, memories written into the very earth. They stopped for the night at a small inn in the last village before her pack's territory. The innkeeper's wife fussed over Rhea's pregnant state, bringing extra blankets and hot tea laced with herbs meant to ease discomfort. "My grandmother lived in these parts," the woman said as she arranged pillows. "Said there used to be a pack in the northern woods. Small but good people. Healers and hunters, living quiet lives." Her expression saddened me. "All gone now. Terrible business, that attack. Rogues," they said, though my grandmother never believed it. "Why not?" Rhea asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the way her heart hammered. She said rogues don't take time to burn bodies and destroy evidence. Said rogues kill and move on. They don't stay to cover their tracks. The innkeeper's wife shook her head. "But what do I know? I'm just an old woman repeating grandmother's tales." After she left, Rhea sat by the fire with Kale's arm around her shoulders, staring into the flames. "Your grandmother was right," she whispered. "It wasn't a rogue. It was murder, planned and executed to silence witnesses. And for 3 years, everyone believed the lie." "Not everyone," Kale said quietly. "You knew. You carried the truth even when no one would listen. And now the realm knows what really happened, knows that Ravenwood murdered innocents to protect their treason. Your family's deaths exposed a conspiracy that might have destroyed the kingdom. Does that make it hurt less?" Rhea's voice cracked. "Does that give meaning to my mother's death, to my father's sacrifice, to Cade never getting to grow up?" "No," Kale admitted, pulling her closer. "Nothing makes that hurt less. But maybe knowing their deaths led to justice, to change, to a safer realm for our child. Maybe that's something. Not closure, but purpose." They reached the memorial site as dawn broke, painting the snow-covered clearing in shades of rose and gold. The memorial stood in the center of what had once been her pack's main gathering hall. All that remained now was foundation stones and memories written in S. Crafted from white marble that seemed to glow in the morning light, the monument rose 3 times Rhea's height. Names were carved into its surface. Every member of her pack who died that night, from the eldest elder to the youngest child. 47 names in total. 47 lives cut short by greed and ambition. At the base, an inscription read, "They lived with honor. They died with courage. They will never be forgotten." Rhea's legs nearly gave out. Kale caught her, supporting her weight as she stared at the monument through tears that blurred her vision. Cora took her other arm, and together they helped her approach the marble surface. Her hand trembled as she reached out, fingers tracing names carved deep into stone. Her mother, Lyanna, beloved healer. Her father, Garrett, protector of the pack. And there, near the center, her brother's name, Cade, who'd been only 15 when rogues that weren't rogues had stolen his future. "I'm sorry," Rhea whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "I'm so sorry I survived when you didn't. I'm sorry it took 3 years for justice. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. She pressed her forehead against the cold marble, her pregnant belly making the position awkward, but she didn't care. Grief poured out of her in waves, 3 years of bottled pain finally finding release. But I promise you, she continued, her voice gaining strength, I promise your deaths meant something. The kingdom is changing because of what happened here. We're building something better, something where omegas have value, where healers are honored, where small packs can live without fear of being erased because they're inconvenient to someone's ambitions. Kale's hand rested on her shoulder, his presence a steady anchor. Your family would be proud of you, Rhea. Proud of the woman you've become, proud of how you've honored their memory. My mother would have loved you, Rhea said, turning to look up at him through her tears. She believed in fated mates, in the moon goddess's wisdom. She would have seen what we have and smiled. Her hand went to her belly, and she would have been so excited about becoming a grandmother. They spent an hour at the memorial, Rhea telling stories about each person whose name was carved there. Thane and the guards stood at respectful distance, giving her space for grief while maintaining protective vigilance. Finally, as the sun climbed higher and the cold began to seep through their heavy cloaks, Rhea performed the ritual she'd planned. From a pouch at her belt, she withdrew seeds, comfrey, her mother's favorite healing herb. She and Kale planted them around the memorial's base, pressing them into earth still frozen but beginning to thaw where sunlight touched. In spring, they'll bloom, Rhea said, brushing snow from her hands. White and purple flowers, healing herbs growing where violence happened. Life from death. Hope from grief. Cora knelt beside her, adding her own seeds to the earth, lavender for peace, sage for wisdom. They'll be beautiful, she said softly. A living tribute. As they prepared to leave, Rhea turned back once more, her hand resting on her swollen belly. I'm going to tell our child about you. She promised the names carved in stone. About grandmother Lionel's healing hands and her gentle strength. About grandfather Garrett's courage and his unwavering protection. About Uncle Cade, who wanted to be a warrior and would have been magnificent. Her voice cracked but held steady. You won't be forgotten. I swear it on my life, on my child's life, on everything I am. You will never be forgotten. The journey back felt lighter somehow, as if laying her ghosts to rest had freed something in her chest that had been locked tight for 3 years. She dozed against Kale's shoulder as the carriage rolled toward home, his hand protective over their child. When they arrived at Stoneheart Fortress, Thane met them with news that shifted the atmosphere immediately from peaceful to tense. Your Majesties, we've had developments while you were gone, the commander said grimly. 2 more merchant caravans attacked on the northern routes. This time the attackers left a message carved into a tree where the guards were killed. His jaw clenched. It said, the Omega's spawn will not inherit what Alpha's built. Rhea's hand went instinctively to her belly, protective fury rising sharp and hot. Kale's expression went cold, the look of an Alpha King contemplating violence. They're targeting our child, Kale said, his voice deadly quiet. Not just opposing my rule or Rhea's position as Luna. They're threatening our unborn child. It appears so, Thane confirmed. We've increased security around the fortress, doubled the guards on your chambers, and I've placed our most trusted warriors on constant alert. But, Your Majesty, he hesitated. We need to consider the possibility that there's someone inside the fortress feeding information to these attackers. Someone who knew you'd be traveling north, who might know details about Luna's condition and routines. The implications sent ice through Rhea's veins. A traitor in their midst, again. Just when they'd thought Ravenwood's conspiracy was finished, new threats emerged from the shadows. We root them out, Kale said flatly. However long it takes, whatever methods are necessary. No one threatens my mate and child and lives to boast about it. That evening, Rhea stood once more in the medicinal gardens despite the cold, wrapped in furs and accompanied by 4 guards who watched the perimeter with hawk-like intensity. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby's strong kicks, and she thought about the memorial they'd left behind, names carved in stone, seeds planted in frozen earth. Your grandmother would have loved you, she whispered to the child moving within her. She would have taught you about healing, about the power of gentleness combined with strength. Your grandfather would have taught you to fight, to protect those weaker than yourself. And your Uncle Cade. Her voice caught. He would have been the best uncle, teaching you mischief and laughter. The baby kicked as if in response, and Rhea smiled through threatening tears. You're going to be born into a complicated world, little one. There are people who'll judge you for having an Omega mother, who'll think you're less because half your blood comes from the lowest rank. But you're also going to be born into a world that's changing, slowly, painfully, but changing nonetheless. She felt Kale's presence before she heard him, the mate bond humming with his approach. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his warmth cutting through the winter cold. Talking to our stubborn child? He asked, his voice holding gentle humor. Telling them about their family, Rhea said. About the people they'll never meet, but who shaped who they'll become. She leaned back against him, and warning them that life won't be easy, that there are people who'll hate them simply for existing. Then we teach them to be strong, Kale said firmly. To stand tall despite the hatred, to fight for what's right, to honor the family that came before while building something new. His hand covered hers over their child. We teach them that true strength comes not from the circumstances of birth, but from choices made in the face of adversity. Like their mother taught their father, Rhea said softly. Exactly like that. They stood together as twilight deepened, surrounded by plants that would sleep through winter and wake again in spring. Above them, the moon began to rise, waxing toward full, eternal witness to the bonds she forged and the lives she guided. And somewhere in the frozen north, seeds lay dormant in earth, waiting for spring's warmth to coax them into bloom, white and purple flowers that would grow where blood had been spilled, testament to the truth that life always, eventually, triumphs over death. Chapter 10. Shadows Within Stone Walls. The traitor revealed himself 3 weeks after their return from the north, though not in the way anyone expected. Rhea was in the council chamber, 7 months pregnant and growing increasingly uncomfortable, when the young guard posted outside her door suddenly collapsed. He hit the stone floor with a sickening thud, foam bubbling at his lips, his body convulsing in a way that was horrifyingly familiar. Poison! Cora screamed, dropping the documents she'd been organizing. Someone get the healers. But Rhea was already moving, her healer's instincts overriding fear. She dropped to her knees beside the guard, awkward with her swollen belly, and pressed her fingers to his throat, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but erratic, his heart struggling against whatever toxin burned through his veins. The scent hit her then, that gift her mother had passed down making itself known. Not wolfsbane this time, but something else, hemlock if she wasn't mistaken. Deadly, but slower acting than monkshood, giving the victim time to suffer. Get me activated charcoal from the healer's stores, Rhea commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. And water, as much as he can swallow.
Now.
Servants scattered to obey. Thane burst through the door with 6 guards at his back, weapons drawn, his scarred face twisted with fury and fear. What happened? He was poisoned, Rhea said, forcing water past the guard's lips even as he convulsed. Hemlock, I think. We need to flush it from his system before it reaches his heart. The healer arrived within minutes, her hands already glowing with that soft silver light of healing magic. Together, she and Rhea worked frantically, Rhea using her knowledge of toxins while the healer used her gift to accelerate the guard's natural defenses. It took an hour of desperate effort, but finally the convulsions stopped. The guard's breathing steadied, his pulse evening out to something approaching normal. He'd survive, though he'd be weak for days. What were you drinking? Thane demanded the moment the guard could speak, his voice hard as iron. What did you eat? Who gave it to you? Water, the guard gasped, his voice raw. From the pitcher in the side chamber. The one kept for guards on duty. I was thirsty, He coughed, the sound wet and painful. I just took a drink. Horror settled over the room like a shroud. The water pitcher kept specifically for guards, the one dozens of warriors drank from daily. If Rhea hadn't been there, if she hadn't recognized the poison and acted immediately, this young guard would have died. And he wouldn't have been the only one. Someone poisoned the guard's water supply, Thane said, his voice deadly quiet. Someone with access to the fortress, to the areas where security protocols are kept. His eyes swept the room, landing on each person present with measuring intensity. Someone who knew exactly how to hurt us from within. The investigation began immediately. Every servant who'd been near the side chamber was questioned. Every guard who'd had access was scrutinized. The water pitcher itself was examined by 3 separate experts, all confirming what Rhea's nose had already told her. Hemlock, enough to kill a dozen men if they'd all drunk deeply. But the true breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Finn, the young servant who'd helped expose Ravenwood's conspiracy, came to Thane's quarters 3 days after the poisoning. His face was pale, his hands shaking, but determination burned in his eyes. "I've seen something," Finn said, without preamble. "Someone who shouldn't have been where they were." "Speak plainly, boy," Thane ordered, though his voice held more patience than usual. "Lord Garrett," Finn said, the name dropping like a stone into still water. "The Northern Alpha who took over parts of Ravenwood's territory after the executions. I saw him 3 nights ago, coming out of the side chamber where the guard's water is kept. It was past midnight and he looked furtive, like he didn't want to be seen." Thane's expression went cold. "You're certain it was him?" "Yes, Commander. I'd stake my life on it." Finn swallowed hard. "There's more. I've been watching him since then, trying to see if I was imagining things. Yesterday, I saw him meeting with 2 other Northern Lords in a private alcove. They didn't see me. I was cleaning in the corridor above, and sound carried strangely in that part of the fortress. They were talking about waiting, about patience, about how the spawn won't survive birth if the mother doesn't survive winter." The words hung in the air like poison themselves. Rhea, who'd been listening from a chair by the fire where Thane had insisted she rest, felt ice flood her veins. "They're planning to kill me," she said quietly, "before the baby is born. They think if I die, the child dies with me, and Kale will be left alone and vulnerable." "They're not wrong," Kale said from the doorway, his voice rough with barely controlled fury. He crossed to Rhea, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. "If I lost you—" He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the devastation that would follow. "You won't," Rhea said firmly, though fear made her voice shake. "We're not giving them that satisfaction. We're not letting them win." "We need proof," Thane said pragmatically. "Finn's testimony is valuable, but it's not enough to move against a lord of Garrett's standing. We need to catch him in the act or force a confession. Then we give him another opportunity," Kale said, his amber eyes gone cold as winter stone. "We set a trap. The plan was dangerous, reckless, even, but time was running out. Rhea was 7 months pregnant, visibly heavy with child, and growing more vulnerable by the day. If they waited for perfect evidence, she might not survive long enough to deliver. They spread word through carefully chosen channels that Luna would be visiting the medicinal gardens the following evening, accompanied only by her lady-in-waiting and 2 guards. It would be her last visit before the baby came, they said. She wanted to gather herbs for the birthing chamber and wanted to prepare remedies herself as her mother had taught her. The bait was irresistible, the Luna, heavily pregnant and lightly guarded, in a location with multiple entry points and shadows enough to hide a dozen assassins. "I don't like this," Kale growled for the 100th time as they prepared. "You're bait. My mate and my child are bait. I'm also the only person who can detect poison by scent," Rhea reminded him, checking the small vial of activated charcoal she carried in her pocket, insurance against whatever toxin might be used. "If they try to poison me, I'll know before it touches my lips. And if they try physical violence—" She gestured to the shadows where Thane and 20 of his best warriors waited, invisible to casual observation. "If anything happens to you," Kale said, pulling her close despite her protests that he'd wrinkle the careful costume they'd created, "if they so much as scratch you, then you'll tear them apart," Rhea finished. "I know." I feel the same way about you, which is why you're staying hidden until the trap is sprung. No heroic charges that get you killed because you're too focused on reaching me to watch your own back. He kissed her then, hard and possessive and full of fear he couldn't quite hide. The mate bond thrummed between them, both of them acutely aware that this could go terribly wrong. Come back to me, Kale whispered against her mouth. You and our child, safe and whole. Promise me. I promise, Rhea said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The garden was quiet as Rhea entered with Cora at her side and 2 guards trailing at respectful distance. Twilight painted the world in shades of purple and gray, shadows lengthening between the herb beds. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary. But Rhea's wolf was on high alert, her senses straining for any sign of danger. They moved through the garden slowly, Rhea making a show of examining plants and selecting herbs to place in her gathering basket. Cora maintained nervous chatter, playing her role of concerned friend worried about Luna overexerting herself. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Rhea was beginning to think their trap had failed, that Garrett and his conspirators were too cautious to take the bait, when she smelled it. Not poison in the air, something subtler. The scent of men trying to mask their presence with herbs, attempting to disguise their approach by rubbing crushed lavender and sage on their skin. It might have worked on anyone else, but not on her. They're here, Rhea murmured, barely moving her lips. 6 of them, approaching from the east wall. Armed. Cora's hand tightened on her arm, but she didn't break character. Perhaps we should return inside, my lady. The cold isn't good for the baby. In a moment, Rhea said, her voice carrying. I want to gather just a bit more comfort root. My mother always said. She didn't get to finish the sentence. 6 figures burst from the shadows, cloaked and hooded, blades gleaming in the fading light. The 2 guards reacted instantly, weapons drawn, placing themselves between the attackers and Rhea. But they were outnumbered 3-1, and the attackers moved with trained precision. Kill the Omega, one of them shouted, Lord Garrett's voice, unmistakable despite his attempt to disguise it. The child dies with her. Chaos exploded across the garden. The guards fought valiantly, but they were being driven back. Cora grabbed a gardening tool, a small spade with a pointed edge, and swung it at an attacker who got too close, catching him across the temple hard enough to make him stumble. Rhea shifted without thought, her pregnant body making the transformation awkward and painful, but desperation overrode discomfort. Her copper-red wolf was smaller, slower than usual, but she still had teeth and fury. One of the attackers rushed toward her with blade raised, clearly intending to finish this quickly. Rhea dodged, barely, feeling the blade whistle past her ear close enough to draw blood. She lunged for his leg, teeth sinking into muscle, tasting blood and triumph as he screamed. Then Kale was there. His roar shook the garden walls, primal and terrible. His massive black wolf burst from concealment with Thane and 20 warriors behind him, surrounding the attackers before they could flee. The battle shifted in an instant from assassination, attempt to capture, operation. Garrett threw back his hood, recognition of defeat written across his features. You set us up, he snarled, even as guards forced him to his knees. We gave you rope to hang yourselves, Kale said, shifting back to human form. His amber eyes blazed with cold fury. And you took it eagerly. Guards, seize them all. Anyone who moves dies. The 6 conspirators were dragged toward the fortress in chains. Rhea shifted back to human form, wincing as her pregnant belly protested the strain. Kale was beside her immediately, his hands running over her body, checking for injuries. I'm fine, she assured him, though her voice shook. A scratch on my ear, nothing more. The baby is fine, kicking like they want to join the fight. You're bleeding, Kale growled, his thumb gentle on the shallow cut near her temple. It's barely a scratch. I've had worse cooking accidents. She leaned into his warmth, suddenly exhausted. We got them, Kale. We have proof now. 6 conspirators caught attempting murder, with Lord Garrett leading them. You could have died, Kale said roughly, pulling her close despite the protest from his rational mind about her pregnant state. Both of you could have. But we didn't, Rhea interrupted firmly. We survived. We won. And now we're going to make sure they can never threaten our child again. The interrogations began immediately. Under Thane's expert questioning and the certainty of execution if they didn't cooperate, the conspirators broke quickly. They confessed everything. Lord Garrett had been planning this for months, gathering displaced Ravenwood allies who'd lost power and position after the executions. They'd poisoned the guards' water as a test to see if they could operate within the fortress undetected. When that succeeded, they'd grown bolder. The plan had been simple in its brutality: kill Luna before she could give birth, eliminating both her and the child in one strike. They'd hoped Kale would be so devastated that his judgment would falter, giving them an opportunity to seize power in the resulting chaos. We did it for the old ways. Garrett spat during his final interrogation, his face twisted with self-righteous fury. For tradition. For a world where alphas rule and omegas know their place. Your precious Luna is an abomination, an omega pretending to be something she's not, carrying a child that shouldn't exist. My Luna, Kale said softly, his voice more terrifying for its quiet intensity, is worth 1,000 of you. She's braver, stronger, wiser than any alpha I've known. And her child, our child, will inherit a kingdom she's making better through her mere existence. He leaned forward, his amber eyes holding Garrett's gaze with predatory focus. You'll die tomorrow at dawn. All 6 of you. And your names will be remembered only as cautionary tales, examples of what happens when prejudice and greed override honor. The executions took place as promised, swift and final. Rhea didn't watch this time. 7 months pregnant and exhausted from the attempt on her life, she remained in their chambers with Cora keeping her company. When Kale returned, his hands clean but his expression heavy, she opened her arms and let him hold her for a long moment. It's done, he said finally. Garrett and his conspirators are dead. Thane is investigating every Northern Lord who might have been involved, rooting out anyone else who shares their ideology. We're not leaving this to chance again. Good, Rhea said firmly. Then softer. I'm tired, Kale. Tired of fighting, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of people trying to kill me for existing. I just want... Her voice broke. I just want to have this baby in peace. I want to hold our child and know they're safe. They will be, Kale promised, his hand protective over her swollen belly. I swear it on everything I am. Our child will grow up safe, loved, and free to be whoever they want to be. No more conspiracies. No more threats. Just family. 2 months, Rhea thought. 2 more months until the baby came. 2 months to prepare, to rest, to hope that Kale was right, and the worst was finally behind them. Outside, winter tightened its grip on the land. But inside their chambers, surrounded by warmth and love and the promise of new life, Rhea felt something she hadn't felt in years.
Peace.
Chapter 11. Spring brings forth hope. The contractions began on the first day of spring, when the last of winter's snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through thawed earth. Rhea woke before dawn with a tightening across her belly that stole her breath, different from the practice contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. This was real. Kale, she gasped, gripping his arm hard enough to bruise. It's time. He was awake instantly, every trace of sleep vanishing as instinct took over. Are you sure? The healer said you had another week. The baby doesn't care what the healer said. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Rhea doubled over with a groan. Get the midwives. Now. Chaos erupted in controlled fashion, servants rushing to prepare the birthing chamber, healers arriving with their supplies, Cora appearing at Rhea's side with the fierce determination of someone ready to face battle. Kale hovered, alternating between helpful and absolutely in the way, his wolf riding so close to the surface that his eyes kept flashing gold. Your Majesty, the head midwife said gently but firmly, you need to leave. Births are no place for. I'm not leaving, Kale interrupted, his voice brooking no argument. She's my mate. That's my child. I will stay. The midwife looked to Rhea, who nodded despite another contraction stealing her ability to speak. He stays, she managed. I want him here. Labor was nothing like the stories made it sound. It wasn't quick or easy or beautiful. It was hours of relentless pain, of breathing through contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. It was Cora holding her hand and whispering encouragement. It was Cale's steady presence at her back, supporting her weight when she couldn't stand anymore, his voice low and constant in her ear. You're doing so well, love. You're so strong. Just a little longer. I can't, Rhea gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. Sweat plastered her hair to her face, and every muscle in her body screamed with exhaustion. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can, Cale said firmly, his hands steadying her. You survived a pack massacre. You exposed a conspiracy. You fought assassins while 7 months pregnant. You can do this, Rhea. You can do anything. The midwife examined her and smiled. The baby's crowning. Just a few more pushes, my lady. Your child is almost here. Something shifted in Rhea then. Some reserve of strength she hadn't known existed. Her wolf surged forward, lending animal endurance to human determination. She bore down with the next contraction, pushing with everything she had left. That's it. The midwife encouraged me. Again, one more. The world narrowed to effort and agony and the overwhelming need to bring this child safely into the world. One more push, then another. And then, a baby's cries split the air, strong and indignant and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, the midwife announced, tears streaming down her face as she lifted the squalling infant. A healthy, beautiful girl. Rhea collapsed back against Cale, sobbing with relief and exhaustion and overwhelming love as the midwife cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft blankets. Then they placed her in Rhea's arms, and the world stopped. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced and furious at being evicted from her warm home, but absolutely perfect. Dark hair like her father's plastered to her skull, and when she opened her eyes, amber, bright as molten gold. Hello, little one, Rhea whispered, tears streaming down her face. We've been waiting for you. Cale reached out with a trembling hand, touching his daughter's tiny fist. She grabbed his finger immediately, her grip surprisingly strong for something so small, and he made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. She's beautiful, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She's perfect. You're both perfect. What should we name her? Rhea asked, unable to look away from the tiny face scrunched in sleepy confusion. They'd discussed names for months, but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter, this perfect combination of both of them, the answer came easily. Lyanna, Cale said softly, after your mother. So she'll carry that legacy of healing and strength. Fresh tears spilled down Rhea's cheeks. Lyanna, she repeated, tasting the name. Yes. Lyanna Stoneheart, daughter of wolves, heir to a kingdom being remade. News of the birth spread through Stoneheart Fortress, like wildfire. By midday, the corridors outside their chambers were packed with well-wishers, nobles offering congratulations, servants bringing gifts, guards standing vigil with proud smiles. Thane arrived with a hand-carved cradle he'd apparently been working on in secret for months, his scarred face soft with uncharacteristic emotion. For the little princess, he said gruffly, setting the beautiful piece near the bed. May she grow strong and wise like her mother, brave and just like her father. Cora held the baby while Rhea rested, cooing and making ridiculous faces that made Lyanna wave her tiny fists in what might have been amusement or might have been gas. She's going to be trouble, Cora predicted with absolute certainty. I can tell already. She's got her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness. The realm isn't ready. The realm will adapt, Rhea said, too exhausted and happy to care about politics. Just like it adapted to having an Omega Luna. Just like it's adapting to all our reforms. 3 days after the birth, when Rhea had recovered enough to receive formal visitors, they held the presentation ceremony. The great hall filled with every noble who remained at the fortress, those who'd proven their loyalty, who'd accepted the changes sweeping through the kingdom. Kale stood on the dais in his formal regalia, looking every inch the Alpha King. Beside him, Rhea wore a gown of silver and copper, her Luna colors, and held their daughter wrapped in blankets embroidered with a stone heart sigil. "My lords and ladies," Kale announced, his voice carrying through the vaulted space. "We present to you Princess Lioness Stoneheart, heir to the throne, daughter of the moon goddess's chosen bond." The hall erupted in cheers and howls, wolves giving voice to celebration. Not everyone was genuinely happy. Rhea could see the strain on some faces, the nobles who still couldn't accept an Omega's child inheriting power. But they were outnumbered now by those who'd witnessed the changes, who'd seen how Rhea's reforms had strengthened rather than weakened the kingdom. "This child," Kale continued when the noise died down, "represents our future. A future where worth is measured by character rather than rank, where healing is valued as much as fighting, where every wolf has a voice regardless of their station." His amber eyes swept the assembly. "Some of you still resist these changes. But look at her, this perfect child born of a bond some said was impossible. Look and understand that the moon goddess makes no mistakes." Rhea stepped forward, holding Lioness so all could see. The baby chose that moment to open her eyes, bright amber inherited from her father, and make a sound that might have been a coo or might have been commentary on the assembled nobility. Several people laughed, the tension breaking like ice under the spring sun. "She's already judging us," Thane muttered from his position beside the dais, and more laughter rippled through the crowd. That evening, after the ceremonies and celebrations finally ended, Rhea sat in a rocking chair by the window with Lioness at her breast. The baby nursed contentedly, her tiny hand curled against Rhea's skin, and the simple peace of the moment made Rhea's eyes sting with tears. "What are you thinking about?" Kale asked, settling on the floor beside the chair. He'd shed his formal clothes for simple tunic and breeches, looking more like the man she'd fallen in love with than the king he was. "Everything," Rhea admitted. "How impossible this would have seemed a year ago. How I was just a kitchen servant trying to survive, trying not to drown in grief. And now." She looked down at their daughter, this tiny, perfect creature who held their hearts in her miniature hands. "Now I'm a mother, a Luna, someone who matters." "You always mattered," Kale said firmly. "Even when you were invisible in the kitchens, even when the world refused to see you, you mattered. You just needed someone to recognize it." "We saved each other," Rhea said, reaching out to run her fingers through his hair. "You gave me purpose beyond survival. I gave you trust beyond paranoia. We built this together. And we'll keep building," Kale promised, his hand covering hers. "For her. For the kingdom we want her to inherit. For all the children who'll come after, Omega and Alpha alike, who deserve better than what came before." Lioness finished nursing and promptly fell asleep, her tiny face relaxed in absolute contentment. Rhea burped her gently, then held her close, breathing in that sweet baby scent that made her wolf purr with satisfaction. "My mother would have loved her," Rhea whispered. "Would have taught her about herbs and healing, about the power of gentleness. My father would have been wrapped around her tiny finger from the first moment. And Cade." Her voice caught. "He would have been the best uncle." "There with her in spirit," Kale said softly. "Every time you teach her something your mother taught you, every time you tell her stories about her grandparents, they live on through that. Through her." Spring deepened into full bloom over the following weeks. Rhea had kept her promise about the memorial. The comfort seed she'd planted in winter's grip pushed through the thawed earth and began to grow. By late spring, white and purple flowers bloomed around the white marble monument, a living testament to lives lost and remembered. A courier brought word and a sketch, and Rhea wept when she saw it, her family's name surrounded by flowers, beauty growing from tragedy. She hung the sketch in Lioness's nursery, so her daughter would always know where she came from, would always remember the sacrifices that had brought her into a changing world. The reforms Rhea had started continued to spread, slowly reshaping the kingdom's foundation. The representative council gained authority and respect. Omegas began speaking up in pack councils, their voices finally heard. Healers received recognition and resources previously denied them. It wasn't perfect. Change never was. There were still nobles who resisted, still packs that clung to the old hierarchies. But the direction was set, the momentum building toward something better. And through it all, at the center of this slow revolution, was a tiny girl with amber eyes and her mother's copper hair beginning to show through the newborn dark. Lioness Stoneheart, who would grow up in a world being remade for her, who would inherit a kingdom transformed by her parents' love and determination. One evening, as spring turned toward summer, Rhea stood in the medicinal gardens with Lioness strapped to her chest in a carrier. The baby slept peacefully while Rhea taught her students, a class that had grown to include 20 wolves of various ranks, all eager to learn the healing arts. "Remember," Rhea said, pointing to a purple-flowered plant, "monkshood is deadly, but in careful, measured doses, it can treat certain heart conditions. The difference between poison and medicine is often just a matter of amount and application. Never use what you don't fully understand, but never fear knowledge either." Cora stood among the students, having decided to learn healing alongside her duties as lady-in-waiting. She caught Rhea's eye and smiled, a shared understanding of how far they'd come from the kitchens where they'd once toiled in anonymity. Kale found them there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. He approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt the lesson, and simply watched as his mate taught the next generation of healers while their daughter dozed against her heart. This was what peace looked like, he thought. Not the absence of challenges or threats, but this family purpose, building something that would outlast them all. When the lesson ended and the students departed, Kale stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both his mate and his daughter. "I love watching you teach," he said against Rhea's hair. "Watching you share your mother's gift with others who'll use it to heal and protect. It's the best way I know to honor her memory," Rhea said, leaning back against his strength. "To ensure that what she taught me doesn't die with me, that it spreads and grows and helps people long after we're gone." Lioness stirred, making small sounds of waking, and Rhea pulled her from the carrier to settle her more comfortably. The baby's amber eyes opened, focusing on her father's face with an intensity that always surprised him in something so small. "Hello, little wolf," Kale whispered, running a gentle finger down her soft cheek. "Did you enjoy your first healing lesson?" Lina grabbed his finger in response, her grip strong and sure, and made a sound that was probably meaningless, but that both parents interpreted as agreement. They stood together as twilight deepened, Alpha King, Omega Luna, and the princess who represented their future, surrounded by plants that healed and harmed, by flowers that bloomed where seeds had been planted in hope and grief. Above them, the moon rose full and bright, the goddess whose bond had brought them together watching over her children with eternal blessing. And in the north, at a memorial carved from white marble, comfort flowers bloomed in profusion, white and purple, healing and hope, life triumphant over death. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, that was still being written, and it would be written in love. Chapter 12. Seasons of Growth. 5 years passed in a rhythm of seasons and slow transformation. Lina grew from infant to child, wild-haired and curious, with her father's amber eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. She ran through the fortress corridors with abandon, guards scrambling to keep pace with the small whirlwind who asked endless questions about everything she encountered. "Mama, why do some wolves have different colors?" she asked one morning, her small hand in Rhea's as they walked through the medicinal gardens. At 5 years old, she was tall for her age and fearless in ways that both delighted and terrified her parents. "Because the moon goddess makes each of us unique," Rhea explained, kneeling to examine a budding chamomile plant alongside her daughter. "Just like these flowers, some are white, some are yellow, but they're all beautiful and useful in their own ways. Wolves are the same. But some people say omegas aren't as good as alphas," Lina said with the blunt honesty of childhood. "I heard Lord Brennan's son say it yesterday. He said his papa says omega should serve, not lead." Rhea's jaw tightened, old wounds threatening to reopen. But she kept her voice gentle as she responded. "Some people believe that because it's what they were taught. But your father and I are teaching something different, that every wolf has value, that rank doesn't determine worth. What do you think matters more, Lyanna? The circumstances someone is born into, or the choices they make with their life? Lyanna considered this with the seriousness only a child could bring to philosophical questions. Choices, she decided firmly. Because you were born Omega, but you became Luna. You chose to be brave. Exactly. Rhea pulled her daughter close, pressing a kiss to her copper-threaded dark hair. Remember that when people try to tell you who you should be, you get to choose, little wolf. Always. The kingdom had changed in 5 years, though not always in easy or comfortable ways. The representative council had become permanent, its voice carrying weight in decisions that shaped the realm. Omegas served in positions previously denied them, as healers in noble houses, as advisors to local packs, even as guards in some more progressive territories. But resistance remained. Lord Brennan and nobles like him still clung to the old hierarchies, still whispering in corners about the Omega Queen and her tainted heir. They lacked the courage or resources to move openly against the crown, but their resentment simmered like poison beneath polite courtesies. We need to address the Northern Territories, Thane said during a private council meeting. He looked older now, silver threading through his dark hair, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. Lord Brennan is consolidating power, gathering those who share his ideology. He's not planning open rebellion, he's too smart for that, but he's creating a network of resistance that could cause problems down the line. What do you suggest? Kale asked, his hand absently stroking Rhea's where their fingers intertwined on the table. After 5 years of marriage, the mate bond remained as strong as ever, a constant presence that both grounded and completed them. We can't force ideological change, Rhea said thoughtfully. That just breeds martyrs and reinforces their beliefs. But we can continue what we've started, demonstrating that the new ways work better than the old. Show them that kingdoms with inclusive councils are more prosperous, that packs that value all their members are stronger. Lead by example, Cora added from her seat at the table. She'd become one of Rhea's most trusted advisors over the years, her practical wisdom balancing Rhea's idealism. And maybe send Princess Lyanna on a tour of the territories when she's older. Let them see her, an alpha's daughter who treats everyone with respect, who's been raised to value all wolves equally. Hard to maintain prejudice when confronted with living proof that it's baseless. She's 5 years old, Kale protested, his protective instincts flaring. Far too young for political tours. Not now, Cora agreed. But in a few years? When she's old enough to understand but young enough to seem non-threatening. That might be exactly what we need. That evening, Rhea found Kale in Lyanna's nursery, though it could hardly be called that anymore, transformed over the years into a proper child's chamber. Their daughter slept peacefully, curled around a stuffed wolf Cora had made for her, her expression relaxed in dreams. You're brooding, Rhea said softly, sliding her arms around Kale's waist from behind. I'm contemplating the fact that our daughter is already being discussed as a political tool, Kale said, his voice tight. She's 5, Rhea. 5 years old, and already people are planning how to use her to achieve their goals. Don't use her, Rhea corrected gently. Show the realm who she is. There's a difference. And Cora's right. Lyanna has the power to change minds simply by being herself. By being proof that the future we're building works. I wanted to protect her from this, Kale admitted, turning in Rhea's arms to look down at her. I wanted to keep her innocent and safe, let her be a child without the weight of the crown already pressing down. She'll have her childhood, Rhea promised. We'll make sure of it. But she's also our daughter. She was born into this world of change and challenge. We can't shield her from it entirely. We can only prepare her to meet it with strength and wisdom. Lyanna stirred in her sleep, mumbling something that sounded like flowers before settling again. Both parents smiled despite the heavy conversation. When did we become people who make hard choices about our child's future? Kale asked. The moment she was born, Rhea said. The moment we decided to bring life into this complicated world and promised to give her the tools to navigate it. The years continued their steady march. Lina turned 6, then 7, growing taller and more confident with each passing season. She took lessons in reading and writing, in history and mathematics, but she also spent hours in the medicinal gardens with Rhea, learning to identify herbs and understand their properties. "This is wolfsbane," Rhea said one afternoon, pointing to the purple flowers that had once nearly killed Kale. "Deadly poison. But see how it grows next to the comfrey? In nature, danger and healing often exist side by side. The key is knowing which is which." "Like people," Lina said, her young face serious. "Some people seem nice but are dangerous. And some people seem scary but are actually kind." "Exactly like people." Rhea pulled her daughter close, marveling at how perceptive she was becoming. "That's why we learn. Why do we pay attention? Why do we trust our instincts but also verify with evidence?" "Because grandfather was killed by someone he trusted," Lina said matter-of-factly. Kale had told her the story last year, age-appropriate but honest about the dangers of blind trust.
Yes.
"And because your grandmother and her whole pack were killed by people who hid their evil behind smiles and politics." Rhea's voice remained steady despite the old pain. "We honor them by being wise, by building a world where such things happen less often." "I'm going to make them proud," Lina declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "When I'm older, I'm going to be a Luna like you. And I'll make sure everyone is treated fairly, no matter what rank they are." Rhea's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "You already make them proud, little wolf. Every single day." The 8th year brought a development none of them had anticipated. Rhea discovered she was pregnant again, a complete surprise given how careful they'd been, how demanding their lives had become with ruling and raising one child. "How do you feel about it?" Kale asked as they lay in bed that night, his hand resting on her still flat stomach where their second child grew. "Terrified," Rhea admitted honestly. "Lina's birth was hard, and I'm older now. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't handle 2 children while maintaining my duties as Luna?" "Then we adapt," Kale said firmly. "We find help, we adjust our schedules, we do whatever needs doing. We survived assassination attempts, conspiracies, and revolutionizing a kingdom. We can handle another child." "You make it sound so simple." "It won't be simple, but it will be worth it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Another child, Rhea. Another chance to raise someone in this better world we're building. Another piece of our family." Lina took the news with the enthusiasm only an 8-year-old could muster. "I'm going to be a big sister. I can teach them everything. How to identify herbs, how to avoid Lord Brennan's boring lectures, how to sneak extra sweets from the kitchen." "Maybe not that last one," Rhea said with a laugh, pulling her daughter onto her lap. Still possible though Lina was getting almost too big for it. "But yes, you'll be a wonderful big sister. You'll help teach them about the world, about family, about how we treat everyone with kindness regardless of their rank." "Even if they're Omega?" Lina asked seriously. "Especially if they're Omega," Rhea confirmed. "Because Omegas have been taught they're worthless for too long. They need to see that we believe differently, that in this family, in this kingdom, every wolf matters." The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though Rhea's duties as Luna had to be adjusted to accommodate her growing fatigue. Cora stepped in to handle more of the day-to-day council business, while Lina took pride in helping Mama rest by reading to her and bringing her the herb tea the healers recommended. 8 months in, as winter gave way to early spring once more, Rhea stood in the throne room beside Kale for what had become an annual event, the Day of Remembrance. 5 years ago, she'd established it as a way to honor all those lost to the old ways, to violence born of prejudice and greed. The great hall filled with families who'd lost loved ones to the old hierarchies, Omegas worked to death in service, warriors killed in pointless territorial disputes, children who died from lack of resources because their pack's rank was too low to merit aid. "We gather today to remember," Rhea said, her voice carrying despite her pregnant state, making breathing difficult. "To honor those who died under systems we're working to dismantle. Their deaths were not meaningless. They showed us what needed to change. They lit the path towards something better." She lit a candle, the first of hundreds that would burn throughout the day, each one representing a life lost and remembered. Lioness stood beside her, helping to light the next candle, already understanding the solemnity of the moment. One by one, wolves came forward to light candles and speak names. Servants who'd lost family members to cruel masters. Warriors who'd watched friends die in senseless conflicts. Parents who'd buried children taken by a system that valued rank over life. And in the northern forests, at a memorial carved from white marble, comfrey flowers bloomed in their sixth spring, white and purple, healing and hope, life's insistence on continuing despite all attempts to end it. The second child, a boy they named Cade after Rhea's lost brother, arrived on a morning when cherry blossoms fell like snow and the world smelled of renewal. He had his mother's copper-red hair and eyes that shifted between amber and green depending on the light. Lina held him with 8-year-old seriousness, her face full of wonder. "He's so small," she whispered. "Was I this small?" "Smaller," Cale said, watching his family with a fullness in his chest that still surprised him after all these years. His mate, his daughter, his newborn son, everything he'd never thought he'd have, everything that had seemed impossible when he'd ruled alone and bitter. "I'm going to protect him," Lina declared. "Like Papa protects us, like Mama protects everyone with her healing. He's my brother and nothing bad will happen to him while I'm around." Rhea and Cale exchanged glances over their children's heads, pride and love and the bittersweet knowledge that they couldn't actually protect their children from everything. But they could raise them strong, raise them wise, raise them to face whatever came with courage and compassion. "He's lucky to have you as a sister," Rhea said, pulling Lina close while cradling Cade. "You'll teach him so much." "I'll teach him that everyone matters," Lina said seriously. "Even Omegas. Especially Omegas because you're the best person I know and you're Omega, so obviously rank doesn't mean anything important." Through the window, spring sunshine poured golden and warm, carrying the promise of growth and change. The kingdom continued its slow transformation, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but always moving towards something better. And in the heart of Stoneheart Fortress, in a chamber filled with love and light and the sweet scent of new life, a family born from impossible odds looked toward a future they were building together. One day, one choice, one moment of courage at a time. Chapter 13, Trials of Blood. 10 years after the Lunas election that had changed everything, Rhea stood in the council chamber watching her daughter address the assembled nobles with a confidence that made her heart swell with pride and ache with bittersweet nostalgia. Lina was 15 now, no longer a child but not quite an adult, caught in that fierce transition where everything felt urgent and nothing felt impossible. She'd grown tall like her father, with his commanding presence softened by her mother's compassion. Her copper-threaded dark hair was braided in the traditional style of a princess, and her amber eyes blazed with conviction as she presented her proposal. "The Northern Territories need investment, not punishment," Lina argued, her voice steady despite addressing lords 3 times her age. "Lord Brennan's resistance isn't just about ideology, it's about economics. His lands have suffered from the trade route changes. If we redirect resources to improve infrastructure there, we address the root cause of his discontent rather than just the symptoms." Lord Brennan himself sat rigid in his seat, clearly torn between offense at being analyzed by a teenage girl and grudging respect for the accuracy of her assessment. "The princess makes a valid point," Thane said from his position beside the throne. The commander was graying now, his face lined with the weight of years, but his strategic mind remained sharp as ever. "We've focused on ideological reform without addressing the practical concerns of those most resistant to change." "Practical concerns don't excuse prejudice," another lord countered. "Lord Brennan has been vocal in his opposition to the Luna's reforms, to the princess's very legitimacy. Which is why addressing his practical concerns might shift his ideological position," Lina interrupted smoothly. "People are more receptive to change when they're not struggling to survive. We show him that the new ways benefit everyone, including him, and his resistance loses its foundation." Rhea caught Cale's eye across the room, seeing her own pride reflected there. Their daughter was a natural diplomat, able to navigate the treacherous waters of noble politics with an ease neither parent had possessed at her age. "We'll consider the proposal," Cale said, effectively ending the debate for now. Princess Lyanna will work with Commander Thane and the Economic Council to develop a detailed plan. This session is adjourned. As nobles filed out, some muttering about princesses overstepping their authority while others discussed the merits of her suggestion, Brennan lingered. He approached the dais with obvious reluctance, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, Your Grace," he said, bowing to Cale and Rhea before turning to Lyanna. "Princess, your assessment was not inaccurate. My lands have struggled since the trade route shifted. I would be willing to discuss how your proposed infrastructure improvements might benefit the Northern Territories." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even full acceptance. But it was more than he'd ever offered before, and Lyanna recognized the olive branch for what it was. "I'd be honored to discuss it, Lord Brennan," she said with diplomatic grace. "Perhaps we could arrange a meeting this week?" After he left, Lyanna practically bounced with excitement. "Did you see? He's actually willing to talk. This could be the breakthrough we've been working toward for years." "You did well," Cale said, pulling his daughter into a hug that she pretended to protest but clearly enjoyed. "Your mother and I are proud of you." "Very proud," Rhea agreed, wrapping her arms around both of them. "Though I'm not sure I'm ready for you to be old enough to negotiate with prejudiced lords." "Mama, I've been negotiating with prejudiced lords since I was 8, Lyanna pointed out. "Remember when Lord Garrett's nephew tried to tell me Omegas couldn't read, and I recited 3 historical texts from memory to prove him wrong?" "How could I forget?" Rhea laughed. "He didn't speak to you for a year after that." 7-year-old Cade burst into the chamber, his copper-red hair wild from running, his tunic stained with what looked like grass and possibly mud. Behind him, a harried guard tried to keep pace. "Mama."
"Papa."
"Lyanna." Cade shouted with typical exuberance. "Come quick. The comfort is blooming in the memorial garden, and there are so many flowers this year. It's like the whole clearing is purple and white." Rhea's breath caught. The memorial garden, what had once been her pack's territory, now maintained as sacred ground. They visited twice a year, on the anniversary of the massacre and on the first day of spring. But Cade's excitement was contagious, and the idea of seeing the flowers in full bloom. "Can we go?" Lyanna asked, her diplomatic composure giving way to the enthusiasm of someone still young enough to find joy in simple beauty. "I know we weren't planning to travel north until next month, but if the flowers are at peak bloom now." Cale looked at Rhea, seeing the longing in her eyes. 10 years since the memorial was built, and every year the flowers grew more abundant, a living testament to resilience, to life's insistence on beauty, even in places marked by death. "We go tomorrow," Cale decided. "All of us." It's time Cade understands more about where his name comes from, about the family he never met but whose legacy he carries. The journey north took 3 days, the spring weather cooperating with clear skies and warming temperatures. Cade peppered them with questions the entire way, about his grandmother's healing abilities, about his grandfather's strength, about the uncle he'd been named for who'd wanted to be a warrior. Was Uncle Cade brave? The boy asked as their carriage rolled through greening forests. "Very brave," Rhea said, pulling her son close. "When the attack came, he was only 15, just a bit older than your sister is now. He tried to protect us, tried to buy time for others to escape. He fought warriors twice his size and with 10 times his training because he loved his family more than he feared death." "I want to be brave like that," Cade said seriously. "Like Uncle Cade, and like you, Mama, for surviving when everyone else died." "Bravery isn't just about fighting," Lyanna interjected, her tone taking on the teaching quality she'd inherited from their mother. "It's about making hard choices, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Mama was brave when she saved Papa from poison, but she's also brave every day when she fights for Omegas to have rights, when she teaches healing to anyone who wants to learn regardless of their rank." "Your sister is wise beyond her years," Cale murmured to Rhea, who smiled despite the heavy emotions stirred by returning to this place. They arrived at the memorial clearing as the sun reached its zenith, and the sight stole breath from lungs. The comfrey had multiplied exponentially over 10 years, spreading far beyond the original plantings. White and purple flowers carpeted the ground around the marble monument, creating a sea of color that seemed to glow in the spring sunlight. The memorial itself stood pristine and proud, the names carved into its surface, as clear as the day they'd been etched. "It's beautiful," Lyanna whispered, taking her mother's hand. She'd been here before, but never when the flowers were in such abundance. Cade stood frozen, his young face suddenly solemn as he took in the monument and understood, really understood for the first time, what this place represented. "They all died here?" he asked quietly. "All 47 of them?" "Yes," Rhea said, kneeling beside her son. "They died because evil people wanted to protect secrets, because prejudice and greed matter more to some wolves than honor and life. But we remember them. We make sure their deaths mean something by building a better world in their memory." She led Cade to the memorial, showing him specific names. "This was your grandmother Lyanna, who could heal wounds that other healers thought impossible. This was your grandfather Garrett, who fought to give his family time to escape. And this," her voice caught, "this was Cade, your uncle, who you're named after." "Tell me about him," Cade said, tracing the carved letters with small fingers.
So Rhea did.
She told him about a boy who'd been full of energy and mischief, who'd wanted desperately to prove himself as a warrior, but who'd had the kindest heart of anyone she'd ever known. Who'd loved animals and had once nursed an injured rabbit back to health despite their father's protests that warriors shouldn't be soft. Who'd made her laugh even on the hardest days, who'd been her best friend as well as her brother. "He sounds like me," Cade said wonderingly. "Except I want to be a healer, not a warrior. But the other stuff, the energy and the animals, and making people laugh, that sounds like me." "That's because you carry a spirit," Rhea said, pulling her son close as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "He lives on through you, through your name and your nature. He'd be so proud of you." Cale stood with Lyanna a respectful distance away, giving Rhea and Cade space for their moment. His daughter leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Do you think they're watching?" Lyanna asked quietly. "Grandmother Lyanna and the others? Do you think they can see what we've built?" "I'd like to believe so," Cale said. "I'd like to think they see how you fight for justice, how your mother has transformed the kingdom, how Cade brings joy everywhere he goes. I'd like to think they're proud." "I'll make them proud," Lyanna said fiercely. "When I'm Luna someday, I'll continue what Mama started. I'll make sure every Omega knows they have value, that every wolf has a voice." She stopped abruptly, her expression shifting to alarm. Her wolf had sensed it first, the disturbance in the forest surrounding them, the approaching threat her instincts screamed about. "Papa," she said urgently. "Someone's coming. Multiple people. Armed." Cale's hand went to his sword immediately, his wolf surging forward as he scanned the tree line. Thane and the guards who'd accompanied them formed a protective circle around the family, weapons drawn. Figures emerged from the forest, at least 15 of them, wearing dark clothes and carrying weapons. At their head was a man Rhea recognized with sinking dread, Lord Brennan's eldest son, Marcus. Behind him were warriors bearing the colors of several northern houses, the ones who'd most resisted the reforms. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice carrying false courtesy. "How convenient to find you here, so far from your fortress, with minimal guard." Almost as if fate itself has provided an opportunity. "An opportunity for what, exactly?" Cale asked, his voice deadly calm as he positioned himself between his family and the threat. "To commit treason? To attack your king and his family. To restore the natural order." Marcus spat, his mask of courtesy dropping away to reveal pure hatred. 10 years we've endured this insult, an Omega ruling as Luna, infecting our children with ideas of equality, weakening the very foundation of our society. My father may be willing to negotiate with that girl, he gestured dismissively at Lyanna, but some of us remember what it means to be alpha. Your father will see you hanged for this, Thane growled, his sword raised and ready. "My father's weak," Marcus sneered, "corrupted by their pretty words and empty promises. But we will save him from his own weakness. We'll eliminate the Omega and her spawn, and the king will have no choice but to take a proper Luna. Someone worthy of the title." Rhea's wolf surged forward, fury and protective instinct overwhelming caution. Her children were here. Her mate was here. And these fools thought they could threaten her family in a place sanctified by her pack's blood? "You chose the wrong place for an ambush," Rhea said, her voice gone cold as winter stone. She pulled a small vial from her pocket, one she always carried, a lesson learned from nearly dying to poison years ago. "This ground is sacred to me. My family died here, and I will not let you desecrate their memory with more violence." She threw the vial at the ground between them, and it shattered in a cloud of fine powder. A mixture she'd created herself, combining irritants and disorienting agents that wouldn't kill but would definitely incapacitate. The clearing erupted into chaos as the powder took effect, rebels stumbling and coughing, their eyes streaming. Kale shifted into his massive black wolf and launched himself at Marcus, taking him down before he could give orders. Thane and the guards engaged the rebels who'd been far enough back to avoid the powder's effects. "Lyanna, protect your brother," Rhea commanded, shifting into her own copper-red wolf. "Get to the memorial. Your backs to the stone." Lyanna didn't hesitate. She grabbed Cade and ran, positioning them behind the marble monument where they'd have protection from at least one side. Her own wolf rose close to the surface, and though she was only 15 and had never fought in real combat, she'd been trained since childhood. If anyone got past her parents and the guards, they'd face her teeth and claws. The battle was brutal but brief. Kale fought with the fury of an alpha protecting his mate and children, his massive jaws closing around throats and breaking bones. Rhea moved like lightning, smaller and faster, targeting vulnerable points and using her knowledge of anatomy to disable rather than kill when possible. Thane and the guards fought with professional efficiency, years of training evident in every movement. The rebels, for all their bravado, were no match for seasoned warriors fighting to protect their royal family. Within minutes, it was over. 10 rebels lay dead or dying, the survivors surrendering with hands raised and weapons dropped. Marcus himself knelt in the mud, Kale's massive paw on his back, his throat intact only because the king needed him alive to stand trial. Rhea shifted back to human form, breathing hard, her body covered in cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. She ran to her children, pulling them both into her arms as they emerged from behind the memorial. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, checking them both frantically for injuries. "We're fine, Mama," Lyanna said, though her voice shook slightly. That was incredible. You fought like someone who has everything to lose," Rhea finished. She looked at the memorial, at the names of those who died here, and felt their presence like a warmth in her chest. "They died here. I won't let anyone else die on this ground. Not my children. Not ever." Kale shifted back, his expression grim as he looked at the carnage. Treason against the crown. Attempted murder of the royal family. Marcus Brennan and his conspirators will face the full weight of justice. "My father will," Marcus began, but Kale cut him off with a snarl. "Your father will be horrified that his son led an attack on his king after he'd just begun negotiations with the princess. This betrayal will destroy him, Marcus. You've ended your family's line with this idiocy." They returned to Stoneheart Fortress with prisoners in chains and a story that spread through the kingdom like wildfire. Lord Brennan wept when he heard what his son had done, genuine grief mixing with shame and horror. He'd been on the verge of changing, of accepting the new ways, and his own heir had destroyed any chance of redemption. The trial was swift and public. Marcus and his co-conspirators were found guilty of high treason and attempted regicide. The sentences were carried out within the week. Execution for the leaders, hard labor for those who could prove they'd been coerced. But the aftermath of the attack shifted something in the kingdom. The northern lords who'd harbored secret sympathies for the old ways saw what resistance led to, saw their children and heirs die for clinging to prejudice. and they began, slowly, to change. Your daughter's idea about infrastructure investment? Lord Brennan said during a private meeting 2 weeks after his son's execution. He looked haggard, aged a decade in a fortnight, but his eyes held determination. Let's implement it. I want to show that the Northern Territories can prosper under the new system. His voice cracked. I want my son's death to mean something. Let it be a cautionary tale, yes, but also let what comes after show that change is possible, that we can be better. Rhea reached across the table and took his hand, an Omega Luna offering comfort to an Alpha Lord who'd spent years resisting everything she represented. We'll make it mean something, she promised. Together. That night, with her children finally asleep after the trauma of witnessing violence, Rhea stood on the balcony of their chambers, looking out over the kingdom she'd helped reshape. Kale joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. They almost took everything from us, he said quietly. Again. But they didn't, Rhea countered, leaning back into his warmth.
We survived.
We protected our children. And maybe this will be the last time. Maybe seeing what happened to Marcus will finally convince the holdouts that the old ways are dead. You're optimistic. I have to be. For them. She gestured toward the chambers where Lyanna and Cade slept. They're growing up in a world that's better than the one we inherited. Not perfect, nowhere close to perfect, but better. And they'll make it better still when it's their turn to lead. Lyanna handled herself well today, Kale said. Protecting her brother, keeping her head despite the fear. She'll make a strong Luna someday. And Cade will make a remarkable healer, Rhea added. He saw violence today, saw how quickly life can be threatened and taken. But I saw his face. He wasn't thinking about revenge or fighting. He was thinking about how to help, how to heal. He has his grandmother's spirit. They both have pieces of everyone we've lost, Kale said. Lyanna has your mother's wisdom and your father's courage. Cade has your brother's heart and your gift for healing. Our children carry forward the best of those who came before. That's what legacy is, Rhea said softly. Not monuments or names carved in stone, though those matter too. But the living legacy, the way our children embody the lessons and love of those they'll never meet. That's how the dead live on. Above them, the moon shone full and bright, the goddess who'd bound them together still watching over her chosen children. And in the north, at a memorial surrounded by healing flowers, the names of 47 wolves stood eternal, remembered, honored, their deaths given meaning by the changes they'd inspired. The path forward was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more resistance, more people who clung to old prejudices and feared new possibilities. But tonight, under the moon's blessing, with her mate's arms around her and her children sleeping safely nearby, Rhea felt something she'd almost forgotten in 3 years of hiding in kitchens, in months of danger and conspiracy. She felt hope. Chapter 14. The Legacy of Wolves. 20 years after an Omega kitchen servant had saved a king's life, Rhea stood in the great hall watching her daughter prepare for her own Luna ceremony. Lyanna was 25 now, a woman grown, strong and wise beyond her years, ready to take her place beside the Alpha she'd chosen as mate. Not chosen by politics or arranged marriage, but chosen by the heart and blessed by the moon goddess herself. Kieran was a beta from the Eastern Territories, a warrior with a gentle soul who looked at Lyanna like she hung the moon and stars. The realm had celebrated when the mate bond had snapped into place between them 2 years ago, proof that the goddess still guided their paths. Stop fussing, Mama, Lyanna said with affectionate exasperation as Rhea adjusted her daughter's ceremonial gown for the 3rd time. It's perfect. I'm perfect. Everything is perfect. Nothing is perfect until I say it is, Rhea countered, but she stepped back to admire her work. The gown was silver and copper, Luna colors that Rhea herself had made traditional, embroidered with wolves and flowers intertwined. Lyanna wore her dark hair loose, the copper threads catching light like fire, and her amber eyes shone with happiness and nervous excitement in equal measure. You look just like I did on my claiming day, Rhea said, her voice catching with emotion. beautiful and terrified, and ready to change the world. I had a good example to follow, Lina said, pulling her mother into a hug. You showed me what it means to be Luna, not just a title, but a responsibility. A chance to make things better for everyone, not just those born into privilege. A knock at the door announced Cade's arrival. At 17, Rhea's son had grown into a striking young man with her copper-red hair and a healing gift that surpassed even her own. He'd just been accepted into the Royal Healing Academy, the same institution Rhea had founded 15 years ago to ensure formal training for healers regardless of rank. They're ready for you, Cade said, then grinned at his sister. Though I told him to wait another hour because you're being ridiculously particular about your hair. I am not. Lina protested, but she was laughing. Take that back, or I'll tell Kieran about the time you fell in the medicinal garden pond trying to impress that healer's apprentice. You wouldn't dare. Try me, little brother. Watching them bicker with the easy affection of siblings who genuinely liked each other, Rhea felt her heart swell with gratitude for this life she'd built from ashes and grief. Two children who'd never known the loss she'd endured, who'd grown up safe and loved in a kingdom being slowly transformed into something better. Come, Rhea said, linking arms with both her children. Your father is probably wearing a hole in the floor with his pacing, and Thane is threatening to drag him to the ceremony, by force if necessary. The great hall blazed with light and life. Every noble family in the realm had sent representatives, alphas and betas, but also omegas now, wolves of all ranks gathering to witness a Luna ceremony that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. Kale stood at the front, and Rhea's breath still caught sight of him despite 2 decades of marriage. His black hair was more silver now than dark, lines etched into his face by years of rule and responsibility. But his amber eyes still held that fierce intensity, and when they found her in the crowd, the mate bond hummed with the same rightness it always had. Took you long enough, he murmured when she reached his side, his hand finding hers automatically. Our daughter wanted everything perfect. Wonder where she gets that from. Kale said, his lips quivering in a smile that made her heart skip despite everything. The ceremony began with traditional elements, the presentation of the mate pair to the assembled pack, the exchange of vows before witnesses, the symbolic sharing of bread and wine. But Lina and Kieran had also added their own touches, elements that reflected the changing kingdom. I vow to honor all wolves equally, Lina said, her voice carrying through the hall with natural authority. To hear the voices of those who've been silenced, to protect the vulnerable, to lead with wisdom and compassion. I vow to be Luna not just in title, but in service to every member of this pack, regardless of rank or origin. I vow to stand beside you as partner and equal, Kieran responded, his love for her evident in every word. To support your vision, to share your burdens, to honor the path your mother blazed and help you carry it forward into the future. Watching them, Rhea remembered her own claiming ceremony, the fear and hope tangled together, the weight of becoming something she'd never imagined possible. But Lina had been raised for this, had known from childhood that she would one day lead. She stood confident and ready, no longer fighting against prejudice, but building on the foundation Rhea had laid. When Kieran marked Lina, when the mate bond settled into place with that unmistakable rightness, the hall erupted in howls and celebration. The old guard who'd once protested an Omega Luna now cheered for her daughter, without reservation. Not because they'd all changed their minds, some prejudices died slowly, but because Lina had proven herself worthy through years of diplomatic work, through her fierce intelligence and unwavering commitment to justice. She'd earned their respect in ways that transcended rank. The celebration lasted well into the night, but Rhea eventually slipped away, seeking solitude in the medicinal gardens that had always been her sanctuary. Spring had arrived again, the 20th spring since she'd saved a king's life and changed her destiny, and the gardens bloomed with life and promise. She found Cora there already, silver threading through her dark hair now, but her smile as warm as ever. Her best friend, her sister in all but blood, who'd stood by her through everything. Sneaking away from your own daughter's celebration? Cora teased. Needed a moment to breathe, Rhea admitted, settling on a bench beside her friend. It's overwhelming, watching her begin the journey I started. I hope I've prepared her well enough. Wondering if the kingdom will be kind to her. She's stronger than you were at her age, Cora said gently. Not because you were weak, never that, but because she was raised with certainty about her worth, about her purpose. You had to fight for every scrap of self-belief. She's had it from birth. Because of what we built, Rhea said softly. Because you and Kale and Thane and so many others fought beside me to create a world where Omega children could grow up believing in their own value. You started it, Cora corrected. That night you ran forward to stop the king from eating poison. That was the moment everything changed. You chose courage when you could have chosen safety, and the kingdom is better for it. They sat in comfortable silence, breathing in the scent of growing things, listening to music and laughter drift from the fortress behind them. 20 years of change, of slow transformation, of battles won and lost and won again. Do you ever regret it? Cora asked suddenly. Saving him that night? Everything it costs you. The danger, the assassination attempts, the constant struggle against people who hated you for existing. Rhea thought about the question seriously, examining the path her life had taken. The fear and pain, yes. The losses and close calls. But also, Kale's arms around her in the darkness. Lynna's fierce determination to make the world better. Cade's gentle hands bring healing to those in need. A kingdom slowly learning that worth came from character rather than rank. No, she said finally. I don't regret any of it. Because the alternative was letting him die, letting the kingdom fall to Ravenwood's conspiracy. Was living in shadows and grief, surviving but never truly living. I chose to act, and everything that followed, good and terrible and transformative, came from that choice. Even the terrible parts? Even those, Rhea confirmed. Because the terrible parts taught us, made us stronger, showed us what we were fighting against and why it mattered. Kale's voice came from the garden entrance, warm with affection and exasperation. I might have known I'd find you both here. There's a party in your honor. Well, in Lynna's honor, and you're hiding in the gardens. Not hiding, Rhea protested as he settled on the bench beside her, his arm going around her shoulders automatically. Reflecting. Reflecting looks suspiciously like hiding. But he pressed a kiss to her temple, his gesture contradicting his teasing words. Lynna's looking for you. I want you to meet some of the Omega representatives from the Western Territories. Apparently, they traveled 3 weeks to attend her ceremony specifically because of what you started. What we started, Rhea corrected, standing and pulling him up with her. I couldn't have done any of this alone. No, Kale agreed, lacing his fingers through hers. But you were the catalyst, the spark that started the fire. Everything else followed from your courage. They returned to the celebration hand in hand, Cora trailing behind with an indulgent smile. Lynna swept them immediately into conversations with nobles and commoners alike. The mixing of ranks at formal events, another change that would have been scandalous 20 years ago but was now simply expected. The Omega representatives Lynna mentioned were 3 women from different Western packs, all dressed in their finest, all looking at Rhea with something approaching reverence. Your Grace, the eldest said, bowing deeply. I'm Mira, from Clearwater Pack. I wanted to thank you personally for everything you've done. 20 years ago, I was a servant with no hope of anything better. Now I'm head healer for my pack, with the authority to train others and resources to do it properly. My daughter is studying at your healing academy. My life changed because you showed the realm that Omegas could be more than what they'd always been told. I'm Sage, the second woman said, from Riverside Pack. I serve on our local council now, representing Omega interests. We have a voice in decisions that affect our lives. That didn't exist before you. And I'm Ren, the third woman added shyly. I'm mated to an alpha. By choice, with my pack's blessing, because the bond was real. 20 years ago, an Omega mating an alpha outside of political arrangements was unthinkable. Now it's simply possible. You made that possible. Rhea felt tears burning her eyes. I didn't do this for recognition, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I did it because it was right. Because I was tired of watching Omegas suffer for circumstances beyond their control. We know, Mira said gently, which is why we honor you all the more. You fought not for glory, but for justice. And you won. Not completely, not everywhere, but enough to change countless lives. Including ours. Later, much later, when the celebration had finally wound down and guests had departed to their chambers, Rhea found herself alone with Kale on their private balcony. The moon hung full and bright above them, the same moon that had witnessed their claiming 20 years ago, that had blessed their union despite every logical reason it shouldn't work. Do you remember the night we met? Kale asked, pulling her close against the spring chill. When you knocked poison food from my hands and looked at me with those terrified green eyes? I remember thinking I was going to die, Rhea said with a soft laugh. That I just committed treason and would be executed before sunrise. I remember feeling the mate bond snap into place and thinking it had to be some kind of cruel joke. That fate would give me my true mate in the form of an Omega servant I couldn't possibly accept. He turned her to face him, his amber eyes soft with love and wonder. I was so convinced that control was all I had, that trusting anyone would lead to the same death my father suffered. And then you appeared and showed me that trust, real trust, earned and freely given, was stronger than any amount of paranoid control. You gave me a life I never imagined possible, Rhea said, reaching up to cup his face, feeling the silver in his beard scratch against her palms. Not just the title or the position, but the freedom to be fully myself. To use my gifts openly. To stand beside you as an equal rather than beneath you as a servant. You were never beneath me, Kale said fiercely. From the moment we met, you were my salvation.
You just didn't know it yet.
And you were mine, Rhea whispered. My second chance. My reason to hope instead of just surviving. They kissed under the moon's blessing, 20 years of love and partnership and shared struggle deepening the connection between them. The mate bond hummed with contentment, no longer the desperate pull of new attachment, but the steady warmth of souls grown together over decades. I love you, Kale said when they finally broke apart. I loved you when you were a frightened kitchen servant. I loved you when you fought assassins while pregnant. I love you now, as Luna and Mother and the woman who changed a kingdom through sheer stubborn determination. I love you too, Rhea said, leaning into his warmth. My impossible mate. My alpha king. The man who chose love over fear and changed both our lives in the process. Dawn came soft and golden, painting the kingdom in shades of hope. In the medicinal gardens, new growth pushed through the soil, seeds planted by Cade as part of his training, continuing the tradition his mother had started. In the council chambers, documents awaited attention, proposals from Lina about expanding Omega rights in the Eastern Territories, plans from Thane about integrating more diverse voices into military leadership. The work was never finished. There would always be more to do, more minds to change, more systems to reform. But progress had been made, undeniable, transformative progress that touched every level of their society. And in the northern forests, at a memorial carved from white marble, comfrey flowers bloomed in their 20th spring. White and purple, healing and hope, a living testament to 47 wolves who died in darkness, but whose deaths had sparked a light that still burned bright. Their names were carved in stone, never to be forgotten. But their true legacy lived in the kingdom their daughter had helped reshape, in the grandchildren who carried their names and spirits, in every Omega who now stood tall and claimed their worth. This was what victory looked like. Not a single battle won, but a slow, steady transformation of hearts and minds and systems. Not perfection, but progress. Not an ending, but a beginning that would continue long after all of them were gone. Rhea stood in the garden one last time before the day's duties began, her hand resting over her heart where the mate bond connected her to Kale, where love and loss and triumph were woven together into the tapestry of her life. Thank you, she whispered to the mother she'd lost, to the father who'd sacrificed himself, to the brother who'd never grown old. Thank you, for teaching me to be brave, to stand when falling would be easier, to choose action over fear. She felt them then, not as ghosts or grief, but as love that transcended death. In every flower she planted, every life she healed, every omega she empowered to claim their worth. They lived on through her children, through the changes she'd fought for and won. And in 20 years, when her daughter's daughter was born, she would tell that child the story. About a kitchen servant who saved a king. About an omega who became Luna. About wolves who died in darkness, but whose legacy was light. She would tell them that change was possible, that courage mattered, that one person choosing to act could reshape the world. And that legacy, that truth, would live forever. The end. Thank you for following Rhea and Kale's journey from that fateful night in the Great Hall to the legacy they built together. The tale of how an Omega kitchen servant became Luna and transformed a kingdom through courage, love, and unwavering determination is now complete. Don't forget to subscribe to Wolf Heart Tales for more stories of fated mates, forbidden love, and wolves who dare to defy destiny. Until next time, may the moon goddess guide your path.